Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midnight Stories. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I thought it would be nice if everyone could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Alright, let's get comfy, relax, and begin. The lake had frozen over by the time we arrived. Thick, white ice covered everything as far as I could see, smooth except for a few wind-blown snowdrifts scattered across it. Our cabin sat by itself on the shoreline, no other buildings nearby, just woods on one side and the wide, open ice on the other. It was exactly what I wanted: quiet, no neighbors, no traffic, no cell signal. Just cold, still silence. I'd rented the place for 5 nights. Needed a break. The city had been getting to me. Too many people, too much noise, too many little things piling up until everything felt too loud. I didn't tell anyone I was going, just packed a duffel bag and drove north until the roads narrowed and the pine trees got taller. The cabin was small, just a single room with a bed, with stove, a table, and a little kitchen setup. No TV, no Wi-Fi. I brought a stack of books and a few frozen meals, planning to do nothing but read, walk, maybe try ice fishing if I felt like it. The first day passed quietly. I chopped some wood, read by the fire, took a walk along the edge of the lake. There was no wind, just the dry crunch of my boots on the snow. I didn't see a single other person the whole day, not even an animal. It was peaceful. That night, after dinner, I sat by the window looking out at the lake. The sky was cloudy, but the snow reflected a dull light, enough that I could make out the flat stretch of ice. Nothing moved. Eventually, I turned in early. The second night was when I saw the light. I just put my book down, lying in bed, staring out the same window. I couldn't sleep, though it was late. I wasn't thinking about anything important, just watching the shadows and letting the silence settle over me. And then, suddenly, a quick flicker. Just once. Like someone out on the ice had clicked on a flashlight and turned it off just as fast. A small white burst against the dark, too quick to see clearly but unmistakable. I sat up fast, heart picking up a little, pressed my face to the cold glass. Nothing. I waited there for a while, not moving. Eyes wide. Nothing else happened. No second flash. No figures. Nothing. Eventually I crawled back under the blankets, telling myself it could have been anything. Ice shifting. A reflection. I was out in the woods, far from everything. And sometimes the mind plays tricks when everything's still. Next morning, I checked the map. I brought a physical one because there was no signal out here. Spread it out on the table and scanned the whole area around the lake. No other cabins marked. No homes. Nothing but forest and hills. The closest road was the one I'd driven in on, and that was miles away. There was nothing on the other side of the lake. Not unless someone had built something off the books. That day, I walked the edge of the lake again. The ice was solid, thick under my boots. I didn't walk out too far, just enough to see that there were no cracks or weak spots. I looked for any signs of people. No fresh tracks, no tire marks, no snowmobiles. The only footprints I saw were mine from the day before. That night, I stayed up late on purpose. Kept the fire low so the inside of the cabin stayed dark. Pulled a chair up to the window and just watched the lake. An hour passed, then 2. I was starting to think maybe I'd imagined the light before. My eyes were dry from staring so long when it happened again. One quick flash, just like the night before. Same spot, a burst of white, then nothing. Too far to see clearly, maybe 200 feet out onto the ice. Just a single blink. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I dozed off in the chair, I jerked awake, sure I'd seen something move. But the light didn't come back again. Just that one flash. The next day, I made a choice. I had to see for myself. In daylight. I bundled up, long johns, wool socks, thick coat, gloves, scarf. The temperature was brutal, but the air was calm. Sky was overcast again, light gray without shadows. I crossed the ice slowly, step by step. It felt solid, like walking on concrete. Cold wind stung my face as I moved further from shore. I kept my eyes on the spot where I thought the light had been, somewhere near the center of the lake, maybe a bit to the left. After 20 minutes or so, I found them. Boot prints. They came from a tree line across the lake, deep and sharp in the snow. Not fresh, but not old either. Edges still clean, not softened by wind. They came out from the trees in a straight line, headed right to where I was standing. And then they stopped. Right there. No turn, no return path, no shuffle, no drag. Just stopped. Like whoever made them had walked out onto the ice, stood there for a while, and then vanished. I turned in a circle, looking around. No shelter, no hole in the ice, nothing. I followed the prints back toward the woods. About 50 steps, then they disappeared into the trees. I didn't go in. I just stood there, staring at the dark undergrowth. It was too quiet, not peaceful anymore, just empty. I backed away, turned around, and walked back toward my side of the lake, trying not to keep looking over my shoulder. Back at the cabin, I locked the door, sat in the chair again, staring at the lake. This time I closed the curtains after an hour. I didn't want to see the light again. Didn't want to wonder what was standing out there. That night, I barely slept. Every noise the cabin made, every crack of the wood, every hiss of wind outside. I jumped. I started to notice how thin the walls felt, how far I was from anyone else, how easy it would be for someone to come close without being seen or heard. On the fourth day, I checked the trees behind cabin, walked a small loop into the forest looking for more tracks. Found nothing at first. Then behind a fallen log, maybe 30 yards in, I saw something small, black and round. A flashlight. It was old, scratched up, worn, but it worked when I clicked it on. Same narrow beam as what I'd seen on the lake. I didn't pick it up, just stared at it for a long time, then left it there and walked back fast. I didn't wait for the fifth night. That afternoon, I packed everything, tossed in the back of the truck, and left early. I didn't care that I'd paid for another day. I just wanted to be somewhere with people. Streetlights, noise. A few days after I got home, I looked up news from that area. Nothing. No missing people. No reports. I even checked some local forums. But nobody talked about lights or boot prints or cabins out on the lake. It's been a few months now. Sometimes I still wake up thinking I saw that flash again. That single flicker across the ice. Like someone standing there, watching, waiting, never moving, never coming closer, just standing there. And the part that sticks with me the most, the part one think about when I'm lying awake late at night, is how those boot prints didn't go back. They just stopped, right at the edge of the lake, and whatever made them never came back out. I booked the cabin for a long weekend because I needed space. I've been working 60-hour weeks, sleeping like trash, eating worse, and spending too much time scrolling instead of dealing with a growing ache in my chest. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to see anyone. The listing was simple. Asterisk remote, peaceful, cozy, no Wi-Fi, no cell reception, 3 hours from the nearest city star. That was exactly what I wanted. The cabin was tucked into a stretch of pine forest somewhere in the northern part of the state. The drive was long but smooth. Once I got off the highway, I followed a series of narrow roads, each one more isolated than the last, until I reached a gravel path lined with overgrown brush and thick trees. It looked like no one had used the trail in a long time, but the GPS guided me all the way to a wooden gate, chained but unlocked, and just beyond it, the cabin came into view. It was a modest structure, one-story, dark-stained wood, a green tin roof, and a porch that creaked when I stepped onto it. Everything looked just like the pictures. Inside, it smelled like cedar and a little bit like dust. The kitchen had a propane stove and a tiny fridge that ran off a generator out back. The living room had an old couch, a rocking chair, and a fireplace with a neat stack of chopped wood beside it. The bedroom had a simple bed, clean sheets, a small dresser, and thick curtains over the windows. It was cold when I arrived, but I got a fire going and the place warmed up fast. The bathroom was in the back corner. It had a sink, a compost toilet, and a narrow standing shower. The mirror above the sink caught my attention the moment I stepped in. It was oval-shaped, mounted directly into the wall. At first glance, looked perfectly clean. But when I leaned in to brush my teeth that night, I saw it. A smudge. It wasn't dirt or dust. I thought maybe it was just condensation from the cold, but it stayed even after I wiped it with my shirt. I tried again with a damp paper towel. Nothing. The mark was faint, almost like someone had pressed their forehead or fingers against the glass and left behind an oily shape. It wasn't dramatic, just strange. I let it go. It was late and I was tired. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and went to bed. The first night was quiet. The forest was thick enough to deaden most of the sound, so I didn't even hear wind or animals. It felt like being in a sealed box, a kind of silence that made your ears feel hollow. I slept deeply, better than I had in weeks. The next morning, I made eggs and toast on the stove and drank coffee while looking out the front window. There was nothing out there, just trees, a narrow sliver of gravel where my car was parked, and a lot of silence. It felt peaceful. I spent the rest of the day walking trails I found nearby and reading a book on the porch. I didn't even notice the smudge on the mirror again until that evening when I went to wash up. It looked darker, or maybe I was just thinking too much about it. I didn't try to wipe it again. I was tired, so I showered, got into bed, and fell asleep fast. The second morning was when things started to shift. I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth and nearly dropped the toothbrush when I saw the mirror. There was a piece of paper taped to the glass. A torn-out sheet of lined notebook paper curled a little at the corners, like it had been there a while. On it, written in pencil, were the words, "Why did you come here?" I just stood there, staring at it. My mouth went dry. My first thought was that someone had left it as a prank. Maybe the owner thought it would be funny. But the handwriting was messy and uneven, like someone had written it in a hurry or with a shaking hand. I peeled the paper off the mirror. The tape was brittle, yellowish, like it had aged a bit. But the graphite looked fresh, smudged slightly where the pencil had pressed two hard spots. I sat down on the toilet lid and just stared at it for a while. Then I took a picture and messaged the owner, even though I had no reception. I figured it would send later when I drove back toward the highway. Still, it bothered me enough that I kept the paper and carried it out with me when I went for another walk. I checked the cabin when I got back, doors, windows, even under the bed. Everything was locked. Nothing seemed touched. I even went outside and circled the cabin, checking for tracks. The ground was soft and muddy from the rain a couple days before, but I didn't see any footprints aside from my own. Later that day, I drove about 10 miles toward town until I got a single bar of reception. The message I'd sent finally went through. A couple minutes later, I got a reply. It was short. No one has stayed there for over a month. We haven't been out there ourselves in weeks. That's not something we left. Are you sure it wasn't already there? Asterisk, asterisk. I told them it definitely wasn't. They didn't respond again for a while, and when they did, they said they'd try to come check the property, but probably couldn't until the following week. They sounded shaken in the next few texts. Not angry, not like I was being a nuisance, more like they were nervous. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing things, nothing loud, just small, creaking sound from the wood, which I kept telling myself was normal in a place like this. But my brain was on edge. I kept looking at the mirror every time I passed the bathroom like I expected to see something else taped to it. I decided to set up my phone. I propped it against the sink, aimed it at the mirror, and hit record before I went to bed. It was the only thing I could think to do. Maybe it was just some reflection thing. Maybe I'd catch something that would make it make sense. I laid in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling. I kept hearing the wind through the trees, creaks, an occasional soft knock or thud somewhere deeper in the house. I told myself it was just the place settling, just old wood, but I didn't fall asleep until nearly 2 a.m. When I woke up, it was just after 6 a.m. The cabin was cold. Light was starting to seep through the trees. I got up and went to the bathroom first. Nothing looked touched. The mirror was the same, still had the smudge. No paper, nothing new. I grabbed my phone and stopped the recording. It had been running for a little over 4 hours. I scrubbed through it at double speed at first, just watching for movement. For the first few hours, nothing. Then at 4:06 a.m., something moved. It was fast, just a flash. A figure, blurry, too far to make out clearly, but it moved in the reflection. Not in front of the mirror, just in the mirror, like it passed behind the phone. I paused and rewound, watched it again in slow motion. It looked like a person, maybe. No details, just the shape of a shoulder and part of a head as it passed by. I checked the bedroom door. It had been closed all night. The front door too, still latched, still locked. I packed in 15 minutes, didn't even shower, didn't make breakfast. I shoved everything in my bag, grabbed my phone, and threw in the car. My heart was hammering the whole time, like I was expecting to turn and see someone standing there. I didn't stop once during the 5-hour drive back home. I kept checking the rearview mirror every few minutes, like I expected to see a face pop up in the back seat. When I got home, I deleted the video. I didn't want it. I didn't want to analyze it again. I didn't want to start thinking it was some camera glitch or a lighting trick and talk myself into going back to figure it out. I just want to be done with it. I never left a review on the Airbnb listing. The owner messaged once more a few days later saying they'd gone to check the cabin and didn't find anything unusual. But they ended the message with, asterisk, we're probably going to take it down for a while. Asterisk, I still think about that paper, the writing, the way it looked fresh but the tape looked old. I think about how that mirror smudge never came off no matter how hard I tried. I think about the reflection, and I wonder if I kept recording a little longer, if I'd seen where that figure went. But I don't wonder enough to go back. I had been planning the trip for months. After the year I'd had, losing my job, a breakup that left me hollow, and a slow, gnawing sense that I'd lost control of my own life. I needed somewhere quiet, somewhere I could reset. I didn't want distractions. I didn't want self-service. I didn't want people. So I booked a remote, off-grid cabin in northern Minnesota that I found through a listing site. It was the kind of place that didn't have an address, so much as GPS coordinates and a note about where to turn when the road disappeared. I liked the idea of being somewhere that felt forgotten. The drive was long and rough. After the last small town, the paved roads turned to gravel, and after that to hard-packed dirt. My small SUV handled it okay, but I kept thinking about how stuck I'd be if it rained. I reached the cabin in the late afternoon. It sat nestled among a patch of dense spruce trees, the branches dark and close together. There were no neighbors, no power lines, just the wind in the trees and a large, still lake about a quarter mile down the trail. It was late October, and the leaves had already fallen, leaving the forest skeletal and quiet. The air smelled like wet bark and old pine needles. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the photos, just one room with a tiny wood stove in the corner, a bed pushed up against the wall, a small table, a single chair, and a small kitchen area with a hand pump for water. No electricity, no lights except for a few battery lanterns. There was an outhouse about 20 feet out the back. The silence hit me hard as soon as I turned off the car engine. It wasn't peaceful at first. It was loud in its own way. Wind creaking the trees, the occasional rustle of dry leaves skittering across the clearing. My own footsteps felt too loud. That first day, I unpacked what I brought, mostly canned food, water jugs, a sleeping bag, a few books, and a journal. I made a small fire in the stove and heated some soup. The warmth helped settle me, and I sat on the floor by the stove, watching the flames flicker behind the glass. I tried to read, but I kept finding myself staring at the walls or listening for sounds outside. I reminded myself this was what I came for. Quiet. Solitude. That night, I crawled into bed with my coat still on. The temperature had dropped fast, and the fire didn't last long. The bed was stiff, the blankets thin. I noticed earlier that the front door latch didn't quite catch unless I jiggled it a bit. It was old and a little warped. I had to pull the door tight and wiggle the latch up before it sat in place. I made sure I did that before bed. I even checked it twice. There was no lock, just that latch. But I told myself it was fine. Who would come all the way out here? Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up freezing. My nose was cold. I could see my breath. I sat up slowly, pulling the blanket around my shoulders. That was when I noticed it. The cabin door was wide open. Not cracked, not ajar. Wide open. The cold wind pushed in across the floor, and the little fire in the stove had gone out hours ago. My heart started pounding. I stayed frozen for a long second, just staring at the dark rectangle of the open doorway. It didn't make sense. I knew I latched it. I was sure of it. I got up, slowly, trying to listen for anything outside. There was only the wind and the creak of trees. I walked to the door, holding my flashlight, and scanned the clearing outside. Nothing. Just the dim, silvery outlines of trees in the moonlight. I pulled the door shut and and checked the latch again. Still tricky, still needed that wiggle. I did it right. Then I dragged the only chair in the cabin, an old, straight-backed wooden one, under the door handle and wedged it in tight. It wouldn't stop someone determined, but it might give me a second or two to react. I sat awake for a while, fully clothed, listening. Nothing happened. Eventually, I lay back down, not fully asleep, just drifting in and out until dawn. When the morning light came through the window, I got up and made tea with my little camp stove. I went outside to get some air, still trying to convince myself it was the wind. Maybe I didn't latch it fully. Maybe the cold air and the old frame just pushed it open. But as I stepped onto the porch, I stopped. The frost on the wooden boards was patchy now from the sun, but in the shadows near the door I saw them, boot prints. Big ones, heavier than mine. The pattern was different too. Deep treads, like work boots or hiking boots. They started right at the steps and ended at the doorway. I checked around the cabin, but there weren't any more. No car tracks, no trail marks leading away. Just those prints, coming up to the door. I felt something tighten in my chest. I hadn't worn boots. I had trail runners, flat soles, no deep tread. These prints were clear, like someone had stood there for a while. I looked back out across the clearing. Still no one. Nothing. The woods were still and empty. But I didn't feel alone. It was like something heavy had settled over the cabin. I packed fast. I threw my clothes, food, and gear into the back of the car without organizing anything. I kept looking over my shoulder, listening. Every little sound seemed louder. At one point I thought I saw movement in the trees, a shape, maybe, or a trick of light. I didn't wait to figure it out. I didn't even stop to double check if I'd left anything behind. As I drove back down the dirt road, bouncing over ruts and potholes, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. I didn't relax until I was an hour out and saw the first sign of other people, a gas station with a half-lit sign. I filled up the tank and sat in the parking lot for a long time, just letting the car run. My hand was shaking more than I expected. I never told anyone about it. Not really. Not in detail. A few people knew. I went up north for a few days and came back early. I said the weather was bad, that the cold got to me. But the truth is, something was out there. Someone. They came right up to that cabin in the middle of nowhere. They opened the door while I was asleep, and then they left. They didn't steal anything. They didn't break anything. They didn't even come inside, as far as I could tell. But they were there, and that was enough. I don't know what made me want to go up there alone. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was just one of those things that sound good in your head until you actually do them. But I drove out anyway, 4 hours from the city, winding through the back roads, passing through tiny towns with gas stations and boarded-up diners, until I reached the old forest road that led to the cabin. It wasn't even mine. It was my uncle's place. He hadn't used it in a long time, and when I asked if I could stay there for a few days, he said sure, just bring food and don't mess with the wiring. Something about the fuse box acting weird. I told him I wouldn't touch anything. I just needed some quiet. When I got there, it was already late afternoon. The sun was dropping behind the trees, making long shadows stretch across the gravel driveway. The place looked worn down, but not totally abandoned. The front steps creaked under my boots, and when I opened the door, it smelled like dust and old wood, like something that hadn't been aired out in months. Still, it was better than the city. No cars, no people, just quiet and trees. I brought in my bags, set up my stuff, and made a quick dinner. Just pasta and canned sauce. Nothing fancy. The kitchen worked fine. The stove was old but reliable. I had brought a small portable speaker and played some low music while I ate. It helped make the place feel less empty. That first night was okay. I sat out on the small porch for a while, wrapped in a jacket, listening to the wind move through the trees. It was colder than I expected, and I could see my breath when I exhaled. The nearest neighbor was maybe 2 or 3 miles away. I liked that. I liked being alone. At least I thought I did. Inside, the silence got heavier. I could hear the wood creaking in the walls and the roof. Just settling, I told myself. I locked the door, checked the windows, then climbed into the bed with a flashlight and a paperback. I read until I fell asleep, sometime past midnight. I woke up at 3:21 a.m. It was pitch dark, not city dark, not bedroom dark with little glows from a charger or alarm clock. Just black. I reached over for the flashlight on the side table and turned it on. The beam hit the ceiling and lit up dust floating in the air. I listened. There was nothing at first, just the sound of my own breathing, a little fast like I've been dreaming. But then I heard something, a soft scraping sound, faint like something dragging lightly across the floor. I held my breath and turned off the flashlight. I don't know why. Maybe instinct. The sound was gone. I waited. Then I heard it again, closer this time. Same soft scraping, like something brushing over the old wood floor outside the bedroom. I stayed still. I didn't move a muscle. It was like my body went stiff without me telling it to. The sound stopped after a few seconds. Then silence again. I laid there for a long time. I don't know how long. Eventually, I turned the flashlight back on and crept to the bedroom door. It was closed. I opened it slowly. Nothing. Just a hallway. I checked the kitchen, the living room. Everything was the way I left it. The front door was locked. Windows too. I didn't sleep again that night. Next morning, I convinced myself it had just been a dream. The cabin was old, probably rodents or maybe a branch scraping the siding in the wind. I made coffee and tried to shake it off. I went for a short walk through the woods. The trails were overgrown, but still walkable. It helped a little. That afternoon, I sat outside again. I had a notebook and started writing. Just random thoughts. I didn't have a signal, no Wi-Fi, so I figured I'd unplug completely. I even left my phone inside. The air was cold but fresh, and I sat on the porch for maybe 2 hours. When I went back in, I noticed something weird. One of the kitchen chairs had moved. I knew I hadn't touched it. It was pulled out from the table, like someone had sat down and pushed it back halfway. I stared at it for a few seconds, tried to remember if I could have done it without realizing, but no, I hadn't eaten lunch. I hadn't been in the kitchen since breakfast. I pushed it back under the table and checked the door. Still locked. Windows too. That night, I kept the kitchen knife next to the bed, just in case. I laughed at myself a little, feeling like an idiot, but it made me feel better. I left a few lights on and kept the flashlight right next to my hand. I was tired, but I couldn't fall asleep. Every sound felt louder. Every creak made me sit up. It wasn't until 2:47 a.m. that I heard it again. The scrape. Longer this time. Slower, like it was coming from the living room and moving toward the hallway. I held my breath and sat up in bed. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't want whoever or whatever was out there to know I was awake. Then the scraping stopped. I waited. I could hear something breathing. It was faint but steady. Not my breathing. It was coming from the other side of the door. I picked up the knife. My hands were shaking. I didn't move. I sat there frozen, staring at the door. The breathing went on for what felt like forever. Then it stopped. No sound at all. After maybe 15 minutes, I got up. I opened the door slowly. Nothing. Just a hallway. Still and cold. I checked the whole cabin again. No one. No sign of anything. But something was off. One of the kitchen drawers was open. Just a few inches, but I hadn't opened it. I was sure of that. That was the moment I knew someone had been inside. The next morning, I packed. I didn't care how dumb I looked. I threw everything in the bag and loaded up the car. But when I got in and turned the key, nothing happened. Not even a click. The car was dead. I popped the hood, checked what I could. Not that I knew much about cars. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but it wouldn't start. Battery maybe. I hadn't left the lights on. It had worked fine the day before. I thought about walking back toward town, but it was at least 12 miles and I didn't know if I'd even find anyone. No signal either. I went back inside and locked the door. I figured I'd try again in the morning. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up with the knife in my lap, flashlight beside me. I didn't care if I was overreacting anymore. Something was wrong. Around 3 a.m., I heard it again. The scraping. This time, it came right up to the bedroom door. Then a knock. Not loud. Just a soft, slow tap. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then the knob turned. It didn't open, thank God, but it turned slow and smooth. Then stopped. I waited. Hours maybe. Until the sun came up. When it was light enough, I opened the door. No one. But something had changed again. The chair was pulled out again. This time, more than before. Like someone had sat there for hours. I grabbed my bag, went to the car, and tried the engine. It started. No stutter, no delay. Like nothing had happened. I didn't even go back inside to get the rest of my stuff. I drove. Fast. Didn't stop until I reached the main road and got a bar of signal. I pulled over and called my uncle. Told him everything. He didn't say much, just that he was sorry. That maybe he should have warned me. Warned me about what? He said there had been some break-ins around there years ago. Not burglars. Just someone showing up. Standing outside. Sometimes going inside. Never stealing anything. Just being there. He said the sheriff looked into it, but never found anyone. No one was hurt. But people stopped using their cabins. He said that's why he hadn't gone up in so long. That was the last time I ever went out there. A few weeks later, I got a call from my uncle. He had gone back up with a friend to check the place out. He said the door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were all off, but someone had left a cup of water on the kitchen table. The same chair was pulled out. He asked if I'd left it like that. I told him I didn't. I had never used that cup. I hadn't even brought any glass once. Just metal bottles. I don't know who was there. I don't know how they got in or why they didn't take anything. But I know I wasn't alone, and I haven't been since. Even now, back in the city, I check the locks. I hear sounds at night that I never noticed before. Creaks, breathing. Sometimes I wake up at 3 a.m. And sometimes I find my kitchen chair slightly pulled out. We had been planning the trip for weeks. It was early April, and a group of us, 10 people total, had decided to kick off the spring season with a weekend of camping in one of our usual spots in the national forest. We all lived within a few hours of the campground, and this was something we did once a month or so. Nothing formal, just a way to disconnect from work, phones, and noise. We rotated locations a lot, but this campground had always been one of our favorites. It was tucked into a thick section of forest, about 7 or 8 miles from the next nearest campground. The sites were spaced out in clusters, so you never really felt too close to other people. But this time, we were the only ones there. No other campers, no park rangers, no passing cars. Just us. We had 4 campsites spread out in a small loop. 3 couples in tents, including my husband and me, and the others, about 3 or 4 single friends, in their own tents scattered nearby. It was just the right mix of social and space. During the day, we hiked and biked. At night, we sat around the fire with drinks and s'mores, told dumb stories, laughed a lot. The usual stuff. That second night, after we put out the fire around 11 p.m., everyone turned in. Our tent was one of the bigger ones, enough space to stand in, and we had set up a queen-size double thick air mattress. There were vented mesh windows on 2 sides, the type with zip-up covers that we had left open for airflow. Our heads were up against the mesh window at the back. The forest was dead quiet, aside from one thing: snoring. Loud, constant snoring. Nearly all the guys in the group snored like freight trains, and one of the women too. It was kind of a running joke. Normally, I could sleep through it, but that night, it just grated on me. I lay there for what felt like hours, listening to the different rhythms of each person's breathing, some low and steady, others choppy and nasal. It was like an orchestra of exhausted hikers. The tent was warm, the mattress soft, but no matter how I turned, I couldn't sleep. The last time I checked my watch, it was just past 1 a.m. That's when I heard it. At first I thought it was another camper walking to use the bathroom, but then I remembered we were alone. Completely alone. The campground was empty except for us, and the sound wasn't coming from any of the nearby tents. It started faint, almost like someone shifting gravel underfoot, but it got louder. The road through the campsites was gravel, so every step crunched, slow and heavy. The steps came from the far end of the loop and moved with a strange deliberateness. No pause, no hesitation, like whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. They came straight through the middle of the campground, and it was clear they weren't just wandering. The footsteps got closer to our tent, passed right by the fire pit where we'd all been sitting earlier, and then came right up to our tent. I stopped breathing. I lay frozen, barely blinking. My husband was asleep next to me, face turned away, mouth open slightly as he breathed through his nose. The steps circled around the tent slowly, stopping near the back window, just behind our heads. Then I heard it kneel. I say it because I don't know if it was a man or something else. All I know is I heard knees hit the ground, right by the vented mesh window behind our heads. My whole body locked up. I didn't move a muscle. My ears were wide open. I could hear the crunch of gravel shift as it leaned in, and then it exhaled. Loud, forceful, like someone trying to fog up a window. It was close enough that I could feel the vibration in the mesh. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. I was paralyzed with fear. No flashlight clicked on. No words. No sound of walking away at first. Just that heavy breath and silence. Then, the crunching of gravel again, slow and steady as the thing got back up and walked off behind the tent, into the woods. I lay there, listening, straining, following the sound as it moved uphill through the thick trees. I could hear it stepping over branches, through leaves up the steep incline behind our campsite. Not once did it stop or trip. It just kept climbing until the sound faded out completely. I tried waking my husband, but he wouldn't budge. It was like he was in some dead sleep. I even reached over and shook his arm hard, but nothing. I didn't dare get out of the tent, and I didn't call out. Every part of me said not to make a sound. The couple in the tent closest to us didn't stir either. It was like I was the only one awake in the world. Eventually, the silence and fear dulled just enough that I must have fallen asleep. I woke up just after sunrise, disoriented and still scared. The air was colder than it had been during the night, and there was a strange stillness in the forest around us. When we got out of the tent, that's when I saw it. Right behind our tent, on a low stump, there was a deer antler. It was small, not a full rack, maybe from a younger buck. But what made my stomach turn was the flesh still attached to the base. It wasn't clean or dry like a shed antler you might find on a trail. It looked fresh, dark, stringy tissue clinging to the bone. A few flies buzzed around it, even in the morning cold. No one else claimed to have heard anything. Everyone else had slept through the night. A few of them teased me at first when I brought it up. Probably just a dream, one said. But then we checked the recording device we had set up. One of our friends, Kyle, always brought a wildlife audio recorder to see if he could catch any cool sounds, owls, coyotes, that kind of thing. We loaded up the file from that night and played it back. There were the footsteps, just like I'd heard. They started around 1:15 a.m. You could hear the slow, even crunch of gravel growing louder, passing through the camp. Then there was a pause, silence, then the breath. That long, loud exhale. It came through the speaker, so clearly I felt my chest tighten all over again. But that wasn't all. Around 4 a.m., there was a different sound. Chatter. Two voices, if you could even call them that. They sounded like they were speaking to each other in some kind of language, but it wasn't any language I'd ever heard. It wasn't even gibberish like a drunk person might mumble. It was high and low, back and forth, with strange clicking sounds and soft consonants, almost like throat sounds. Not animals, not the wind, and definitely not something you'd hear out there on a quiet spring morning. It went on for maybe 2 minutes, then stopped completely. The rest of the group didn't know what to say after hearing that. The joking stopped. We all stood around the picnic table in silence, just listening to the forest. No one mentioned extending the trip or staying another night. We packed up and left by noon. Later, when I looked up wildlife that might make those kind of sounds, I came up empty. Some people said cougars or bobcats, but it didn't match. Others mentioned mountain folk or hermits, but how would someone get that close and move that quietly in the woods at night? Why come up to just one tent, breathe on it, and leave a bloody antler? I still don't know what it was. All I know is it wasn't a dream. It wasn't just in my head. I heard the steps, I heard the breath, and I heard the voices. And I saw the antler. Whatever came to our tent that night wasn't trying to hurt us. Not yet, but it wanted us to know it was there. Watching, listening, maybe even waiting. We never camped in that spot again. I was deep in the woods of northern Idaho with 3 friends. We'd picked a quiet, isolated spot near a river that cut through the forest. The place was perfect, no other campsites nearby, no cell service, just thick trees, a cold river, and silence. We hiked in about 6 miles from the trailhead, past broken logs and thick pine cover, until we found a little clearing with flat ground for the tents and a short path down to the water. That's where we set up camp for a 3-night trip. The first day was uneventful. We set up the tents, built a fire pit from rocks, and boiled some water from the river with our filters. We hiked up the ridge a little to get a view of the land and saw nothing but more forest stretching out in every direction. I felt safe out there, away from everything. That's part of the reason I like camping. There's no noise, no people, just air and dirt and your own sense of time. That evening, we cooked some freeze-dried meals and sat around the fire until the mosquitoes started getting worse. Around 10, we zipped up in our tents and listened to the night sounds. Frogs, a few owls, the wind in the trees. Nothing unusual. The next day was hot. Not sweltering, but hot enough that I wanted to wash off the sweat and grime from the hike and campfire smoke. So I grabbed a towel, some biodegradable soap, and headed down to the river alone. The others were filtering water and cleaning up from breakfast. The trail down to the riverbank was steep but short, maybe a minute's walk. It flattened out near a wide bend where the water pooled a little. The current was calm there, so it made for a good bathing spot. I set my towel on a big, flat rock and stepped into the water. It was cold enough to sting at first, but after a few seconds, my body adjusted. I waded in until it reached my chest and dunked myself under. I stood there for a bit, scrubbing dirt from my skin, when I noticed something on the opposite side of the river. On the far bank, just beyond the waterline, was a pile of rocks. Not random ones, stacked deliberately. 5 or 6 smooth river stones, balanced one on top of the other. It wasn't huge, maybe 2 feet tall, but it looked out of place. Too neat. I thought maybe another group had camped here before us and left it. I swam across, just a quick stroke across the shallow bend, and stood in front of the stack. It looked fresh. The rocks were clean, with wet spots underneath where they'd been pulled from the river. Something about it bothered me. It wasn't just a cairn for marking a trail. It was too far from any known path. There were no footprints nearby, just a pile, sitting there like a decoration with no purpose. It felt wrong, so I knocked it over. I didn't think twice, just reached out and pushed the top rock off. It tumbled into the grass. The rest followed, clinking against each other as they rolled. I waded back to my side, dried off, and returned to camp. I didn't even mention it. That night, we made dinner, played cards, and settled into our tents a little earlier than before. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up, not to a noise, just that strange sense that something isn't quite right. My tent was zipped, the air was still, but my skin felt cold. I lay there for a while, eyes open, waiting. I didn't hear anything at first. Then I heard crunching, very faint, like someone stepping on dry leaves, slow, careful steps. Not close, but not far either. It stopped and started. Then silence again. I stayed in my sleeping bag, barely breathing. The sounds didn't return. Eventually, I fell back asleep. In the morning, I got up and unzipped my tent. The air was damp, full of pine and cold river water. I stretched and turned toward the fire ring, and that's when I saw them. There were piles of rocks, stacked just like the one I had knocked over, outside each tent. One right by mine, another outside Ryan's, another near Jeremy and Sam's shared tent. Each was almost identical, maybe 5 or 6 stones, wet and smooth, placed carefully one on top of the other. None of US had built them. I just stood there, staring. The others started to unzip and crawl out. Ryan was the first to see his. He looked at me, then the pile, then back at me again. We all stood around the camp for a while, not saying much, just looking at the piles. We didn't laugh or make jokes. I think we all felt the same thing, that something was off. These weren't here when we went to bed. Someone had walked into our campsite while we were sleeping and placed them, quietly, carefully, right outside our tents. No one mentioned the one I'd knocked over at the river. I didn't say anything either. Maybe because I wasn't ready to connect the two events. Maybe because I already had. We didn't pack up and leave right away. We stayed one more night, though none of us really wanted to. We didn't go far from camp that day. We filtered water in pairs, stayed within sight of each other, and kept a fire going all afternoon. We didn't say it out loud, but we were nervous. We triple-checked our tent zippers that night and kept our flashlights within arm's reach. Sleep didn't come easy. Every crack of a branch made me flinch. I kept thinking about the sound of footsteps the night before, about how someone had moved through our camp without making enough noise to wake us up, how close they must have been to each of us. I don't know if I slept at all. Really. I kept my hand on my flashlight most of the night, staring up at the ceiling of the tent, waiting, listening. Morning finally came. I unzipped the tent and stepped out slowly. This time, there weren't rock piles by the tents, but there were more in the woods. I noticed them just beyond the tree line, maybe 20 or 30 feet out. Not just one or two dozens, scattered among the trees, placed in lines or circles. All of them freshly stacked. They hadn't been there yesterday. That was clear. We would have seen them. Someone had placed them there in the middle of the night. That was it for us. We packed up as fast as we could. No breakfast, no coffee, no talking. Just stuffing gear into packs and kicking dirt over the fire pit. We didn't even stop to take a last look at the site. We got on the trail and didn't stop hiking for hours. 6 miles back out, through dense forest that suddenly felt like it was watching us. Every sound felt sharper, every shadow longer. I kept thinking I'd look behind me and see someone standing in the trees. I didn't, but the feeling didn't leave until we made it back to the car. We never talked about it after that. I never told them I had knocked over that first rock pile by the river. I still don't know why I did it. Just something about it seemed strange. I didn't think it mattered. I thought it was just a stack of rocks. But someone had made it, and someone came back to let us know they noticed. I haven't been camping since. I've been camping a long time. I've done all kinds, backpacking through remote forest trails, staying alone in dispersed sites miles from any road, winter camping in snow up to my knees, even hammock camping through storms. After enough years, you develop a feel for things. You can tell when something's wrong in the air, even if you can't say exactly what it is. You notice the way a bird call goes quiet, or the wind shifts, or someone's presence feels a little too heavy for no reason. But most of the time, it's nothing. Just your mind playing tricks on you, or your senses being alert, because that's what camping teaches them to be. But there was one night, just one, that I still can't explain in a way that makes sense, even though there wasn't anything supernatural about it. Just something real and off and unsettling in the worst kind of way. It was 2 summers ago, early August. I had a long weekend and wanted to get out for a few nights, just me, my gear, and the quiet. I ended up at Seneca Shadows Campground near Seneca Rocks in West Virginia. I'd stayed there a couple times before. It's got walk-in tent sites that sit on a little ridge above the main vehicle campsites. You park at a lot down below, hike your gear up a small gravel path through the woods, and pitch your tent among the trees. The tent sites are spaced out decently, and it's far enough away from the RV crowd that you usually get mostly climbers, backpackers, and quiet folks who just want a fire and a good night's sleep. I got in Friday afternoon. It was humid, with a little bit of breeze and the smell of pine needles everywhere. I was maybe the 3rd or 4th tent in the walk-in area. As I was setting up, I noticed a guy in the side about 2 over from me. He was stringing up a covered hammock between 2 trees, not a tent. Looked to be in his mid to late 40s, scruffy, wearing faded work pants and an old flannel tied around his waist, even though it was hot. We nodded at each other as I walked past on the way to fill my water, the usual casual acknowledgement you give at campground. I didn't think much of it. Later, as the sun started to go down and I had dinner going over the little camp stove, he came by to say hey. He said he was up from a few hours south, worked in construction, and came up whenever he had free time to climb the rocks. Said he'd been doing it for over a decade. He didn't give his name, and I didn't ask. He was friendly enough, but there was something about him that I couldn't put my finger on. Not in a dramatic way, just off. His eyes didn't settle when he talked. They darted around a bit, even though his voice stayed calm. He moved his hands too much. When he smiled, it didn't quite make it to his eyes. Still, he didn't seem threatening or anything, just odd. I chalked it up to maybe too much time alone, or one of those guys that just never really learned how to read a room. We all know someone like that. Night came, and it was the kind of quiet that's almost loud. No breeze, no night birds, just the steady buzz of insects and the soft rustle of leaves whenever something small moved through them. I read by headlamp for a bit, then killed the light and lay in my tent. I always sleep light the first night out. New environment, new sounds. Around midnight, I just started to doze when I heard the first scream. It was sharp, sudden, a kind of shout that came from the gut, not the throat. It made me jerk upright in my sleeping bag. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it had been an animal. A fox, maybe. They can sound like a scream in the night, but no. It was human. No doubt about it. Then it stopped. Just one scream, like someone being startled in a nightmare. I lay back down, heart still thumping, and waited. Maybe 5 minutes later, it happened again. Louder this time. It wasn't a scream of fear, it was rage. That was the part that got under my skin. There was a tone in it like someone in a fight, a violent burst, like he was lashing out at someone in his dream. I stayed awake after that, not really scared, but alert. The screams kept coming, not steady, maybe every 20 or 30 minutes, and always sudden, always full of fury. Sometimes a guttural yell, sometimes a wordless shout, but every time it broke the night apart like a whip crack. I didn't hear any thrashing or movement, just the sound from his hammock, over and over again. I started counting them without meaning to. At least a dozen before it was even 3 a.m. I thought about walking over there, thought about shaking him awake, or asking if he was okay, or if he needed anything. But every time I started to unzip my tent, I paused. I didn't know him. I didn't know what state he was in. A man screaming like that in his sleep might have something in him that I didn't want to get too close to. And I didn't know what he might have in that hammock with him. Tools, maybe. A knife. Hell, I had my own knife in my pack. I just didn't want to have to think about using it. So I stayed put. I lay there and listened as the screaming continued into the early morning. It was like being on edge for hours without a break. Every time I'd start to settle down, he'd do it again. By 4 a.m., I was done trying to sleep. I packed up most of my gear in the dark, just using a red light. The sky didn't even start to lighten until about 5:30. At that point, I was sitting on a little log bench by my site with everything packed except the tent itself, just waiting. The air was cool by then, and I remember how damp everything felt. Dew soaking into the soles of my boots, even though I hadn't walked much. At one point I thought he'd stopped, but then he let out one last scream, long, angry, like someone shouting at a person who wasn't answering them. It wasn't like any night terror I'd heard before, and I've camped with people who've had them. This was something else, something deeper. I realized I didn't want to know what he was dreaming about. When it got light enough to see without a headlamp, I took down my tent fast and quiet. The man's hammock was still zipped up, the cover pulled tight. No sound from it now, not even snoring. It was like he turned into a rock the moment the sun came up. I didn't say anything. I didn't look too hard in his direction. I hoisted my pack and walked back down the trail to the parking lot without looking back. I didn't even stop to make breakfast like I usually do. I drove out and ate at a diner 30 miles away, still feeling that pressure in my chest, like something hadn't let go of me yet. I didn't sleep well the next night at home either. I kept thinking about the tone of his voice, how different it was from the calm guy I'd met earlier. Like there were two people in him, and one only came out when he slept. I never reported anything. I don't know what I would have even said. He didn't do anything illegal, didn't threaten anyone. Maybe he really did just have night terrors. But I'll never forget that sound. The way it kept ripping through the woods like something angry and broken was trying to get out of him. I haven't been back to Seneca's shadows since then. Not because I'm scared exactly, just because I don't want to risk hearing something like that again. Some sounds you can't forget. Some nights stick with you long after they're over. That one did, and I think it always will.
I booked a small Airbnb cabin in Oregon for a long weekend. I just wanted to be alone. Work had been eating me alive, and I needed a break from the city, from screens, from people. The cabin was in a wooded area, far from the main roads, about an hour's drive from the nearest gas station. The listing said it had no Wi-Fi, no TV, no cell reception, just peace and quiet. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive up was uneventful, but the last stretch was a dirt road full of deep ruts. My car bottomed out twice. I remember thinking I should have rented an SUV, but I didn't expect it to be that bad. The cabin itself was small, maybe the size of a garage. Dark with siding, metal roof, a single front window. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but it was clean inside. One bed, a little kitchenette, a wood stove, a small bathroom with running water from a tank outside. No mirror in the bathroom, which I thought was strange, but I didn't care much. There were some canned goods and dry stuff on the shelves, like the host said there would be. I brought my own food too. The first night was completely silent. No cars, no wind, just the kind of silence that buzzes in your ears. I lit the wood stove, read an old paperback I found on the shelf, and fell asleep early. No dreams, no disturbances. I actually felt rested when I woke up. The second day, I went for a walk in the woods. There wasn't a marked trail, just old game paths and patches where the trees thinned out. The air smelled sharp and earthy, like damp pine needles and old bark. I walked for hours, no destination, just letting my mind wander. I didn't see a single person. No tents, no cabins, no sounds of other hikers. Around midday, I came across a tree with a deep gash down one side, like it had been scraped open by something. Not a clean cut, more like ripped bark, uneven and fresh. I figured it was a bear or something. That made me a little more alert, so I turned around and headed back. When I got back to the cabin, everything looked the same, but I had this odd feeling that something was off. Nothing specific, just that weird feeling in your chest when something's not right. I checked the front door, the windows, the back. Nothing looked touched. I told myself I was just spooked from being alone in the woods. I made dinner, sat by the stove, and read until it got dark. No electricity meant early nights. That night, I woke up around 3 a.m. My heart was beating fast, but I didn't know why. No sound had woken me up. The fire had died down, and the room was cold. I sat up and listened. Nothing. Then I heard a sound like something brushing against the side of the cabin. Slow, like a dragging noise. I held my breath and stayed still. It stopped. I told myself it could have been a branch in the wind or maybe a raccoon. I stayed awake for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to listen through the thick silence. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I walked around the cabin. There were no low branches nearby, nothing that could have dragged like that. I didn't see any tracks in the dirt either. Still, I shook it off. Maybe it was something falling from the roof. The rest of the day was quiet again. I didn't go far from the cabin this time. I stayed nearby, chopped some wood, read, made coffee. I was still trying to shake that odd feeling from the night before. That evening, I double-checked everything before I went to bed. I locked the door from the inside, wedged a chair under the handle just in case. I left a fire going to keep the room warm, and I kept a flashlight next to me. I fell asleep easier, probably from all the fresh air and walking. But again, I woke up in the middle of the night. Same time, around 3 a.m. This time I heard it clearly. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate crunches in the dirt outside. Not an animal. Not a deer or a bear. They were too controlled. One step at a time, circling the cabin. I sat up and grabbed the flashlight. My mouth was dry. I didn't move, just listened. The footsteps paused by the front door. Then I heard a soft knock. Just once. Then silence. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I didn't even turn on the flashlight. After a few minutes, I heard the steps again, slower this time, fading toward the woods. I sat there, frozen, for maybe an hour. Eventually, I got up and checked the front window. Total darkness. I couldn't see anything. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, I went outside. There were footprints, bare feet, human. They circled the cabin. I counted the steps. They walked around twice, stopped by the door, then wandered back into the trees. I followed the prints for a bit, but they vanished into the undergrowth. The ground was too dry to hold a trail. I felt sick. Who the hell walks around barefoot in the woods in the middle of the night? I packed up immediately. I wanted to leave. I didn't even eat breakfast. Just threw everything into the car and got ready to go. When I turned the key, the engine clicked but didn't start. I tried again. Nothing. Battery wasn't dead. I had headlights. Just wouldn't turn over. I tried 3 more times before I gave up. The car wasn't moving. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down, then decided to hike out. I remembered passing a small ranger station about 8 miles back along the dirt road. I grabbed a water bottle, my backpack, a knife, and started walking. I left a note on the windshield just in case someone came by. said my name, the date, and where I was going. The walk was long and quiet. I didn't see anyone. I checked behind me every few minutes. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The woods felt different that day. Too quiet. I didn't stop until I reached the ranger station. It was locked up, but there was a radio tower and a small parking lot. I got lucky. About 30 minutes later, a ranger truck pulled up. I waved them down and explained everything. He looked me over like he wasn't sure if I was messing with him, but he drove me back. We towed my car out the next day. The mechanic in town said the fuel line had been cut clean through, deliberately. He asked me if I pissed someone off. I said no. I didn't know what else to say. I filed a report with the local sheriff, but nothing ever came of it. They sent someone to look at the cabin. Didn't find anything. No cameras nearby, no evidence. Just bare footprints around the cabin and a cut fuel line. They chalked it up to some vagrant messing around. Said it happens sometimes. I never went back to that area. I stopped using Airbnb for a while too. I still think about it at night sometimes. How quiet it was, how someone was out there with me, watching, not saying anything, not doing anything, just watching and waiting. I was lucky. I know that now. If my car had started, maybe I never would have noticed the footprints. Maybe I would have driven off and not thought twice. But if I'd stayed another night, I don't like to think about what might have happened.
I rent out the basement suite of my house on Airbnb. It's nothing fancy. One bedroom, a small kitchen, and a bathroom. But it's clean, private, and close to the highway, so it's usually booked. I've had dozens of guests. Most people come and go without a problem. I never really thought twice about it, until the guy with the silver sedan. He booked 3 nights under the name Lucas. That's all I had, just the first name. No profile photo, but he had some good reviews, short but positive. Quiet, kept to himself, that kind of thing. I didn't think much of it. I left the key in a lockbox by the door like I always do and sent him the code in the app. He was due to arrive around 5 p.m. That day, I worked late in my home office, which is upstairs on the other end of the house. I didn't hear him come in. Around 7, I went downstairs to see if he'd arrived, mostly to make sure everything was okay. His car was in the driveway, a silver 4-door sedan I hadn't seen before. Lights were on in the basement suite, but the curtains were drawn. I figured he was in and settled. I didn't knock. I usually don't see much of the guests. That's part of the appeal for them. It's private, and I leave them alone. But over the next day, a few small things started to bother me. Nothing big, just enough to make me notice. The first thing was the driveway. The morning after he arrived, I went out to get the paper and saw the car was parked a little crooked, half on the lawn. I'd left clear instructions in the message about where to park. It's not a big thing, but it stuck with me. It just looked careless, like someone who didn't read anything. That night, I heard movement, not just walking, more like pacing. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of slow, heavy steps under my bedroom. The basement suite is right below. I listened for a while. It was steady, back and forth, not hurried, just repetitive. I looked at the clock again, 2:13 a.m., then 2:25. It kept going. Eventually, it stopped. I told myself maybe he was jet-lagged. People sometimes fly in from different time zones. Still, I didn't sleep that well. I kept thinking I'd hear it again. The next day, I walked past the basement entrance and noticed the curtains were still drawn tight. The weather had been nice, sunny, clear. Most guests opened the blinds at least a bit, but his were shut like blackout curtains. From outside, I could barely see any light coming through. Later, I took a closer look at the driveway. There were small cigarette butts near the back of the car, crushed into the gravel. I don't allow smoking inside, but the listing says it's okay to smoke outside as long as people clean up after themselves. These were left there, 6 or 7 of them, right near my hydrangeas. I didn't remember seeing them the day before. That night, it happened again. Around 1:40 a.m., the footsteps started. Same pace, same rhythm. Back and forth. I lay there, wide awake, just listening. At one point, I got up and stood by the bedroom vent. I could hear it better through the duct, heel to toe, slow, steady pacing. I thought about going down there, knocking, saying something, but But what would I say? Can you not walk around your rental at night? I just let it go. The next morning, I noticed something else. The basement entrance has a small porch light above it, motion activated. It usually turns off on its own if there's no movement for a few minutes. But when I stepped outside at 6:30 a.m., it was still on. That light shouldn't have been on that long unless someone had been outside recently. Later that afternoon, I opened the app to check on his checkout time. He was due to leave the next day. I glanced at his profile again. Still no photo, just a first name. I clicked through the reviews. There were more than I remembered, 12 total. But when I read them closely, something fell off. Most of them were short, just a few words, and they didn't feel personal. Just generic praise. And all from hosts with no profile pictures, all created in the last year. It was weird enough that I looked up the email address he used. I couldn't see the whole thing, but the part one could see had a random string of numbers. No name, just something like user 861223. It made me uncomfortable. Most people had names or something identifiable in their email. This one felt like a burner. That night, the pacing didn't start at 2 a.m. It started around 11:45. I was lying in bed, and I heard something slam, not loud but heavy, like a cupboard door being shut too hard. Then footsteps, slower now, more deliberate. I got up and walked down the hall to the stairs. I stood there for a minute, hand on the railing, listening. Then I saw something that stopped me. Through the small frosted window in the front door, I saw movement. A figure outside, just beyond the porch. I stepped back quickly, heart racing. But the motion light hadn't come on. I waited. Nothing else happened. 10 minutes later, I opened the door slowly and stepped out. The air was cold and still. No wind, no movement. I looked toward the driveway. His car was there, still crooked. The porch light above the basement door was off. I walked a little closer, not all the way to the basement, but far enough to see if anything looked wrong. The blinds were still shut tight. No light coming through. No sound. I went back inside. I barely slept that night. My mind kept jumping between ideas. What if he was just weird? What if he was harmless, just socially off? What if I was overreacting? The next morning was his checkout. I waited until noon before I checked the driveway. His car was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I walked down to the basement door and unlocked it. Everything looked normal at first. Clean, bed made, no trash left behind. He'd taken the trash out, even. The bathroom was clean, but the closet in the bedroom was open and empty. Not unusual, except for one thing. The closet has a top shelf where I keep extra blankets. They were gone. They made me pause. I looked around again. The small drawer under the bed was pulled halfway open. That's where I keep the hairdryer. It was gone too. I walked into the kitchen area and opened the cabinets. One mug was missing. Not expensive or anything, but it was part of a set. I checked under the sink. My small toolkit was gone. I keep it there in a plastic bin. Just a flashlight, screwdriver, some tape. None of it was worth much, but it was the pattern that got me. Not a smash and grab, just little things. Quietly taken. That's when I opened the app again. I wanted to report him. I clicked his profile, and it was gone. Just gone. No record. My message thread was still there, but his profile now just said, user no longer active. No way to report or review. I called Airbnb support. They were polite, but didn't offer much. Just said the account had been deactivated. No, they couldn't tell me why. No, they wouldn't give me any information about him. All they could do was flag the booking. I asked them if any other hosts had filed complaints. They wouldn't say. Later that day, I went back down and did a full sweep of the place. That's when I noticed the vent cover in the bedroom had been unscrewed, just slightly, enough that it looked like someone had opened it and then tried to put it back. It wasn't sitting flush anymore. I got a screwdriver and removed it fully. Inside, I found a candy wrapper. Just one, stuffed way back in the duct. That's not something that would just fall in there. Someone put it there. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the pacing. The late night movement. The lights staying on. The missing tools. The unscrewed vent. I didn't know what he'd been doing down there, but it wasn't just sleeping. 2 days later, I noticed a car across the street. Parked in the cul-de-sac. Not facing my house, but angled just enough that I could see the side. Silver. Same make and model. I couldn't be sure it was the same one, but it looked close. I watched it from the upstairs window for over an hour. No one got in or out. It left before dark. A week passed. Then two. I changed the locks, installed new motion lights, put up a small security camera above the basement entrance. I didn't get any new bookings right away, which was fine. I wasn't ready. On a Friday night, 3 weeks after he'd left, I took a call in my kitchen and walked into the hall to grab a pen. That's when I saw the basement door. It's normally locked from both sides, but the deadbolt was undone, just hanging there. I know I locked it. I double-checked now every time. I walked slowly down the stairs. Every light was on in the suite. All of them. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom. I stood at the bottom step and looked around. Nothing was missing. Nothing new. But on the kitchen counter, there was a mug. The missing mug, sitting clean and dry, like it had just been placed there. I don't know how he got back in. I don't know how he got out. I checked the windows. None broken. Nothing forced. I changed the locks again. Added another deadbolt. I listed the basement for long-term rental only with background checks. I haven't rented it out since. Sometimes I still see that car. Not often, just once in a while. Always parked down the street, not for long. But I see it. I leave all the lights on at night now. I don't sleep much anymore. When I do, I dream about footsteps. Steady, slow, just under the floor. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and in a central part of the city. I was only staying for a few days for a short work thing, and I didn't need anything fancy, just somewhere clean where I could shower, sleep, and make a quick breakfast. The listing was a third-floor walk-up in an older brick apartment building, the kind with a long, narrow staircase and cracked tile floors and hallways. The unit itself looked fine in the pictures. A bit plain, but it had a little kitchenette, a bed, a small table. The host had a bunch of good reviews, and it was cheap, so I went for it. The apartment was exactly what I expected when I got there. The front door was one of those heavy, slightly warped wooden ones that scraped the floor when you opened it. Inside, the place smelled faintly of cleaning products, maybe some lemon-scented disinfectant, and a bit of old wood. The windows were narrow, but let in enough light. The furniture was basic: thin mattress on a low frame, a particle board dresser, a small table with 2 wobbly chairs. But everything looked clean. I checked the bathroom, ran the water, flushed the toilet. It worked. The only odd thing was the vent on the ceiling above the bed. It was rectangular, wide, and open, no cover or grate. Just a black hole leading into the wall or ceiling space. The ceilings were high, maybe 10 or 11 feet, so I couldn't see into it without a ladder or chair. It didn't bother me much at the time, though. I figured it was an old building, and maybe someone had removed the cover for maintenance. It looked dusty, but I just ignored it. That first night, I made a quick dinner, some pasta and a jar of sauce I bought from a store nearby. Ate at the table with my phone propped up on a glass, watching some random videos. It was a quiet night. The building didn't seem to have much noise at all. Occasionally, I'd hear some footsteps from upstairs, maybe a thump or something shifting, but nothing unusual. I locked the front door, double-checked it, and got into bed around 11. Around midnight, I woke up needing water. My mouth was dry. I went to the kitchenette, drank from the tap, and stood there in the quiet. That's when I first noticed the sound. A light cough. Soft. It came from above me. I tilted my head and listened. Another faint cough. Raspy, almost like someone trying not to be heard. I looked up at the vent. It sounded like it came from there. At first, I figured it must connect to another unit. Maybe the walls or ceiling spaces were shared. It's an old building. I assumed it was someone watching TV or smoking in the next apartment or something. I didn't think much of it and went back to bed. But then it happened again, a few more times over the next half hour. Not constant, just a cough, then silence. Then later, another one. It didn't sound far away. It sounded like it came from maybe a few feet beyond the vent. Close, like someone was in the wall or the space above the ceiling. The next morning, I sent a message to the host. I just asked if the vent was connected to another unit because I kept hearing someone coughing through it. They replied quickly, saying the unit next door had been vacant for months and the upstairs one was under renovation. No tenants. They even added, "You shouldn't be hearing anything." I stared at that message for a while. It gave me this weird feeling in my chest. like I'd swallowed a handful of ice. I didn't respond. I didn't know what to say. I just said, thanks, and left it at that. I went through the rest of the day trying to act like it wasn't a big deal. Walked around the city, got some food, tried to keep myself busy. But in the back of my mind, I kept thinking about that vent, about how close that coughing had sounded, how dry and humid it had been. That night, I didn't feel tired, even though I hadn't slept much the night before. I lay in bed with the lamp on for a while, reading things on my phone, but I kept glancing up at the vent. Just black. Nothing moved. No sound for a long time. Eventually, I decided to record the night on my phone. I opened the voice memos app, hit record, and placed the phone face down on the nightstand. Mike pointed up. I didn't expect to catch anything. I think part of me wanted proof that nothing was happening, just to ease my own nerves. I finally fell asleep around 1. I woke up around 7. The sun was already coming through the blinds. I sat up and immediately remembered the recording. I grabbed the phone and stopped the memo. 6 hours, something like that. I skipped through it, listening to the scratchy, low-volume hum of silence, occasional tossing and turning, and the creak of the bed. Then I got to the 3-hour mark. I slowed down, turned the volume all the way up, and put in my earbuds. At 3:11 a.m., there was a noise. A faint thump like something dropped. Then about 10 seconds of silence. Then a low voice. It was male. The whisper was close to the phone, too close, as if someone was standing next to the bed. But I'd locked the door, deadbolt and chain. The whisper said something I had to replay 3 or 4 times. It was hard to make out, but after a few listens, it became clear. You're not supposed to be here. That was it. Then nothing. Just the hum of silence again. I sat there for a while, phone in my hand, earbuds still in, just breathing. I didn't know what to do. I replayed the clip again. It didn't sound like it came from the vent. It sounded like it came from right next to the phone, like someone had leaned over me while I slept. I stood up, checked the door. Still locked. Chain still latched. I checked the windows, latched. Nothing looked disturbed. No signs of a break-in. But my stomach was in knots. I didn't shower. I didn't eat. I stuffed everything back into my bag as fast as I could, barely folding anything. I didn't even brush my teeth. I just needed to get out of there. The hallway was empty when I left. I didn't see anyone. The front door of the building creaked when I opened it, and the air outside felt thick and too warm, like I'd stepped into a different world. I didn't look back. I didn't even bother messaging the host again. I just left the key in the drop box like they asked and walked 3 blocks to the first hotel I could find that didn't look sketchy. I paid more than I should have, but I didn't care. I didn't sleep that night either, not really. I deleted the audio recording a few days later. I couldn't stand having it on my phone. I wish I had kept it, maybe sent it to someone, but it didn't matter. I knew what I heard. I still hear it in my head sometimes. The whisper, the pause. That sentence. You're not supposed to be here. I don't stay in Airbnbs anymore. Doesn't matter how cheap or nice they look. If I can't see the front desk and check in face to face, I'm not interested. And I always check the ceiling. I booked a small loft apartment on Airbnb for a week while I was in the city for work. It was in one of those trendy neighborhoods. Tons of coffee shops, yoga studios, murals on every wall. The kind of place where everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. The listing showed bright, all-white interiors, big windows, a minimalist vibe. It seemed perfect for what I needed. Quiet, central, and clean. When I arrived, the key was in a lockbox by the door, just like the host said. Everything looked exactly like the pictures. White counters, white sofa, clean white walls, a little balcony with 2 metal chairs. It smelled faintly of lavender and cleaning products, like they just scrubbed the place that morning. It was one big open room with a lofted bed above the kitchen area and a small bathroom tucked in the back behind a sliding door. I unpacked, took a shower, and walked to get dinner. Everything seemed normal. The first night passed quietly. I slept okay, though I remember feeling like I was more alert than usual. I brushed it off as just being in a new place. Second day, I worked from the small table by the window. I noticed a few weird things, like how the curtains didn't fully close. There were no blinds, and the windows directly faced another apartment building. Still, I didn't think much of it. City apartments are like that sometimes. That night after dinner, I was brushing my teeth when I looked at the mirror in the bathroom. It was large and rectangular, mounted above the sink. At first glance, it looked normal, but the more I stared at it, the more it bugged me. Something about the way it sat against the wall. It seemed thicker than a standard mirror, like it was more of a panel. I leaned closer and tapped it with my knuckles. It made a slightly hollow, dull sound. Not quite glass on wall, more like glass over an empty space. I told myself I was overthinking it, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I finished brushing my teeth and got in bed, but I kept thinking about it. My mind started racing. What if it was one of those two-way mirrors? I'd read stories before. Places hiding cameras, people watching through hidden windows. I sat there for a long time, going over it in my head. Finally, I got up, took my phone, and went back to the bathroom. I turned off the lights, then held my phone flashlight against the mirror at an angle. I moved it slowly along the edge, watching how the light bounced. And sure enough, the light didn't reflect like it should have on a regular mirror. It shone through in a way that made it obvious something was behind the glass. The kind of reflection that only happens with two-way mirrors. I just stood there for a second, staring at it. The bathroom was dead silent. I leaned in again and looked as closely as I could. I didn't see movement or anyone behind it, but it felt like something was there, watching. I backed out of the bathroom, turned on all the lights in the apartment, and sat down on the edge of the couch. My stomach was in knots. I felt violated, angry, anxious all at once. I didn't want to overreact, but I also didn't want to stay there a minute longer. I opened the Airbnb app and messaged the host. I didn't try to be subtle. I told them straight up what I found, that I believed the mirror in the bathroom was two-way, that I felt uncomfortable and unsafe, and I needed to talk. I sent a message and waited. Nothing. I waited 15 minutes. Still nothing. I sent another message. Nothing. I checked out the listing again. It was still live, still had reviews. I scrolled down and saw that all the reviews were overly positive, generic, short. A lot of them just said things like great stay or would book again. Not a single one mentioned a mirror. That made me feel even more uneasy. It felt like something was off. Not just the apartment, but the listing itself. I packed my stuff and left. It was almost 11 p.m. I walked down the block with my backpack and suitcase and ordered an Uber to a hotel. While I waited, I took a few pictures of the mirror in the bathroom. I also took a short video of the flashlight trick, just to document what I saw. I didn't sleep much that night, even at the hotel. The next morning, I went to the police station. I filed a report and showed them the pictures and video. I told them everything. How I found a mirror, how the host didn't respond, how the listing was still active. The officer took down my statement and said they would look into it. They didn't give me much information beyond that. Just said someone would follow up if they found anything. That same day, I also contacted Airbnb support. I sent them the photos, the mirror video, screenshots of my messages with the host. I told them the situation in as much detail as I could. They said they'd escalate it and investigate. They refunded my stay by the next day, and I noticed the listing was still up at that point. But 2 days later, I checked again and it was gone. Not just the listing, but the host's profile. Completely wiped from the platform. No trace of it. All the reviews, the photos, everything gone. Like it had never existed. I never got a follow-up from the police. I called once a week later, and they said the report was still under review, but there wasn't much they could tell me. I didn't push it. I figured if they found something serious, they'd contact me. What really stuck with me, after all this, wasn't just the mirror or the host's silence. It was the thought that I might not have been the first person who stayed there and noticed. Or maybe others noticed, but didn't say anything. Maybe someone else had it worse. The listing had been up long enough to get dozens of reviews. Dozens of people who stayed there and didn't see it, or didn't care, or didn't want to deal with it. I kept thinking about that mirror, how easy it would be to install one like that. How easy it would be to watch someone without them knowing. How a place could look spotless and modern and well-reviewed on the surface, but hide something rotten underneath. I thought about how long I'd been there, how I changed in that bathroom, how I slept just steps away from a hidden space I couldn't see. After that, I never booked another Airbnb without checking every mirror first. I even bought a small flashlight and kept it in my bag just for that purpose. I also started reading reviews more closely, looking for red flags, patterns, anything off. I don't care how nice a place looks in pictures now. If something feels wrong, I trust it. That week was supposed to be a normal work trip, just a clean, quiet place to stay. But now, I always wonder, what would have happened if I hadn't noticed the mirror? If I'd stayed the full week? If someone had been watching every second? Maybe they were. Maybe that's why the listing disappeared so fast. I'll never know, but I'll never forget the feeling of standing in that bathroom, shining a light into the glass, and realizing someone could have been on the other side. My husband and I were camping at a state park that we'd never been to before. It was early spring, still a little chilly at night, but the weather during the day had been warm and clear, just right for hiking. We got there on a Friday afternoon, set up our tent, laid out our gear, and cooked dinner together as the sun went down behind the trees. The place was peaceful. We weren't deep in the wilderness. It was a proper campground with paved roads, picnic tables, and numbered sites. There were other campers nearby, but the sites were spaced out enough to give everyone a bit of privacy. You could still hear voices and laughter from the other camps, but it wasn't too loud. The sun dropped quick once it passed the treetops, and after the fire died down, I told my husband I was going to walk down to the shower building. I had skipped my morning shower and wanted to clean up before bed. It was probably around 9:30. Too dark to walk without a flashlight, so I took mine. I had on leggings, a hoodie, flip-flops, and I carried my small travel bag with my soap, towel, and a change of clothes. The path was familiar enough. We had walked to the bathroom earlier that day, but it felt different at night. The shower house was about a quarter mile down the paved road, past a few campsites, a small open field, and a curve in the road that blocked the view of our site once you got past it. As I was walking, I saw the glow of a campfire off to my right, a few sites up. There were some voices, a couple men, one of them louder than the others. Laughing, slurring. I didn't think anything of it. People drink when they camp. It's not unusual. I kept walking, head down, flashlight on the road. Then I heard him call out. I couldn't make out the words at first, just something like a drawn-out hey. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if it was meant for me. But then I heard footsteps behind me, uneven ones like someone not fully balanced. Then I heard him again, louder, saying something like, "Where you headed?" I kept walking. Faster now. My pulse started rising. I didn't want to assume anything too soon, but something in my gut was already tightening. I could hear the sound of his shoes on the pavement, closer than I wanted. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of thinking I was willing to engage. The shower building finally came into view. I walked faster. The sound of his footsteps behind me didn't stop. He wasn't running, but he was definitely following. I felt that sharp rush of cold under my skin that only comes when you know you're being watched, and it's not safe. The kind of thing that makes your body tighten, your breath get shallow, your hands start to shake, but not from weakness, from anger. When I got to the building, I yanked open the heavy women's side door, slipped inside, and slammed it shut behind me. It echoed. The lock clicked into place. I stood there for a second, heart pounding. The air inside was damp and warm from the steam of the showers. The smell of soap and mildew hung in the air. I held the door handle for a few seconds, half expecting to feel it pull or rattle. It didn't. I waited another minute, then moved toward the back stall, the furthest from the door. I didn't get in the shower. I didn't even change. I just stood in that stall behind the curtain, gripping my bag and listening for any sound. My ears were ringing. Every drop of water from the sink faucet, every creak in the pipes made me tense. I tried calling my husband. No signal. I walked to the door, cracked it open, stuck the phone out to try and get reception. Still nothing. I went back inside, dialed again, still nothing. He didn't have his phone on him anyway. I knew he probably left it in the tent. He usually did. I was angry now. Not just scared. Angry. That someone thought it was okay to follow me like that. Angry at myself for walking alone. Angry at him for not having his phone. Mostly, I was angry at the man outside. I didn't know who he was, what he wanted, but he made a choice to follow me, and it was the wrong one. I stayed in the shower building for what felt like forever. I wasn't crying. I wasn't panicking. I was just locked in, pacing a little, checking the door every couple of minutes, trying to breathe slowly, trying to listen. After maybe 20 minutes, I heard something outside. Not footsteps, but a new sound. A voice I recognized. My husband, his boots on the pavement, walking quickly. I peeked out the narrow, frosted window on the side of the building. I could just barely make out the silhouette of him walking toward the entrance. I opened the door quickly and stepped out, and as soon as I did, I saw the drunk guy again, walking back toward his own site, a couple 100 feet away. He looked like he'd just given up and wandered back. I don't know if he was waiting outside the building the whole time, or if he went back and forth, but he had definitely lingered too long. My husband hadn't seen him, just me. I told him what happened, and as we walked back to our site, I couldn't shake the feeling of how quickly things could have gone differently. If that door hadn't been unlocked, if I had tripped, if he had been a little bolder, if there had been no one else around. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him in my mind. Not his face, just the shape of him behind me. The slow, uninvited steps. The way he chose me out of the dark. The next morning, I saw his sight on the way to the ranger station. He was sitting in a camp chair, drinking something from a plastic cup, eyes shaded by sunglasses. I didn't say anything. I didn't want a confrontation, but I reported it to the ranger. Gave them the number of the site, a description of the man, what he did. They said they'd look into it. I don't know what happened after that. I didn't see him again. We cut our trip short, packed up and left that afternoon instead of staying the extra night we had planned. The whole ride home, I sat thinking about how it had all played out, how close that man had gotten, and how if he'd gotten just a little closer, I don't know what would have happened. But I know I wouldn't have frozen. I know myself well enough to say I would have fought back hard. Why get scared like that? Something in me switches. I don't cry. I don't beg. I get mean. I get sharp. And it scared me to think how far I might have gone if he had pushed one step too far. I haven't gone back to that campground since. We still camp, but I don't go to the showers alone at night anymore. I don't walk off without telling my husband, and he always keeps his phone on now. It's not about being paranoid. It's about being ready. That night taught me something, that even in a place that feels safe, surrounded by trees, families, kids on bikes, the sound of crickets and firewood crackling, there are still people who will test your safety, who will walk up behind you like you don't have the right to feel safe. And I'll never let that happen again. I had never been to Africa before that trip. My cousin worked with a conservation group in Botswana, and he had invited me to visit. I had just quit my job and needed a break from the noise and pressure of everything back home. So I figured a couple weeks out in the wild might help clear my head. It sounded adventurous, something different. I didn't overthink it. We stayed near the edge of a large reserve, close to the bush, but not fully in it. There was a small fenced compound with 4 huts, a kitchen structure, and a shed for gear. The fence wasn't very strong. It was mostly just a thin wire running around the edge, meant to discourage animals more than stop them. My cousin said lions usually avoided the area because of the noise and human scent, and that made me feel somewhat okay about it. But still, being surrounded by wilderness was something I wasn't used to. At night it got very dark. No streetlights, no city hum, just crickets and the occasional distant bark or call of some animal I couldn't recognize. The first couple of nights went by without anything unusual. During the day we drove out into the reserve to take photographs and check tracking collars on elephants and zebras. It was hot, dusty, and beautiful. At night, we cooked simple meals, sat under the stars, and then went to bed early. The hut I stayed in had a solid wooden door, a narrow bed, a small desk, and a battery-powered lantern. There were gaps at the top of the walls where the wood slats didn't quite meet the roof, and I could sometimes hear the wind or insects slipping through. The nights were loud with nature, but after a while it all blurred into background noise. It was the 4th night when I noticed something different. I had gotten up to pee around 2 a.m. The toilet was in a separate outhouse about 20 feet from the huts. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. It was colder than I expected, the kind of dry, brittle cold that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The sky was huge and full of stars. I walked slowly to the outhouse, trying not to trip on the uneven dirt path. Halfway there, I heard something, a heavy, low sound, Not like the yapping of jackals or the chirping of frogs. This was deep. I stopped and turned off my flashlight. My eyes adjusted quickly. There was no movement, no more sound, just the rustling of leaves and the distant pulse of night insects. I figured it might have been my imagination, or maybe a large animal far away. After a minute, I turned the flashlight back on and finished what I came out for. As I walked back, I turned the light to the left, toward the fence line. There, near the far end of the compound, I saw two small dots reflected back. Eyes. Very low to the ground, unmoving. My throat tightened. The eyes blinked once, slowly, then disappeared into the dark. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. I stood frozen. I was maybe 30 feet from a door to my hut, but I didn't want to run. I remembered someone saying sudden movement could trigger a chase response in wild animals. I forced myself to walk, one slow step at a time. Try not to shine the light around too much, try not to make a sound. I got to the door and slipped inside, locking it behind me. I barely slept that night. Every sound made my skin crawl. I stared at the cracks in the wall where the light from outside barely crept in. My breathing was shallow, my heart wouldn't slow down. But nothing happened. The night passed, and when the sun came up, everything looked normal again. That morning, I checked the dirt near the fence where I thought I saw the eyes. I found tracks, large, deep paw prints. 4 toes, no claws. Lion. I knew that for sure. I followed them for a short distance, but they disappeared into the brush quickly. I told my cousin. He nodded and said sometimes they came close, but rarely entered. Just be careful, he told me. Don't walk around alone at night. I started paying more attention. I kept the flashlight next to me in bed. I double-checked the lock on the door each night. I stopped drinking too much water in the evening, so I wouldn't have to get up to pee in the dark. I didn't want to go outside again. 2 nights later, something woke me. It was a sound, soft at first, then louder. Breathing, not human. Heavy, rhythmic, right outside the hut wall. I didn't move. I could feel every inch of my body tense up. The breathing grew louder, closer. I heard the crunch of dry grass underweight. Then something brushed against the outside wall. A slow, scraping drag like fur or a thick hide. My mouth went dry. I couldn't see anything. The lantern was off, but I didn't want to turn it on. I didn't want to make a sound or a flash. I just lay there, frozen. The thing outside moved slowly past the hut, then stopped. I heard a snuffling sound, like an animal sniffing, then the sound of paws shifting in the dirt. It was right by the door. I pictured the thin wood. I remember how the latch was just a small metal hook and loop. No real lock. Nothing that would stop anything determined. I waited for the sound of claws on the wood, for the push, for the creak of the door giving way. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would shake the bed. But nothing happened. After a minute, the sound faded. The animal moved on, toward the fence, then into the bush. When morning came, I went out and looked again. Fresh prints, deep ones, right outside my door. There were also 2 scratch marks on the lower part of the wood, not deep, but real. I showed them to my cousin. He looked serious but calm. It probably smelled something. Could be just checking. Don't leave food inside. Don't leave the door open. It'll lose interest eventually. That day I couldn't focus on anything. We drove out again to check on some GPS collars, but I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been. I kept playing it over in my mind. The sound of it breathing, how big the prints were, how thin the door felt. That night, I tried to go to sleep early, hoping that if I was asleep already, I wouldn't notice anything. But I couldn't relax. I kept listening. Every crunch of a leaf outside made my body tense. Around 1:30 a.m., I heard something again. This time softer, lighter steps, still heavy, but not directly at the door. It circled the hut, then went quiet. I waited in bed, holding my flashlight, but not turning it on. I lay still for what felt like an hour. My neck was stiff. My lower back ached from staying tense. And then I heard it, 3 deep, low sounds. Not a growl, not a roar, just low grunts like huffs from a big chest. It was out there, close. Then I heard scratching. This time not at the door, but higher up along the wall slats. Something was testing the gaps. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the roof, toward the wall gaps near the top. Nothing, just the wooden beams and shadows. But I kept it on. Eventually, the sounds faded again. I stayed awake until sunrise. After that, I insisted we reinforce the hut. My cousin helped nail down extra boards over the slats near the top. We added a bar to the inside of the door, just a wooden stick we wedged across. It wasn't much, but it felt better than nothing. We were supposed to stay another week, but I couldn't take it. I started having trouble sleeping. My hands would shake in the morning. I kept imagining worst-case scenarios, waking up to the door wide open, seeing a shape in the room, feeling warm breath in the dark. I asked to cut the trip short. On the last night before we left, I stayed up. I couldn't sleep anyway. I sat on the bed with the flashlight in one hand and a kitchen knife in the other. I knew it was useless, but it gave me some sense of control. Around 3 a.m., it came back. This time it didn't circle. It walked straight to the hut and sat down. I could hear it breathe. Long, slow exhales. It stayed for almost 15 minutes. I didn't move. I didn't blink. Then it walked to the edge of the fence and scratched at the wire. It was quiet, deliberate, not aggressive, but not afraid either. Then it left. When the sun rose, I went outside one last time. I followed the tracks as far as I could. They led away from the compound and vanished into the tall grass. I flew out that afternoon. The ride back to the airport was quiet. My cousin tried to make small talk, but I barely responded. My body was in the truck, but my head was still back at that hut. For weeks after I returned home, I had dreams about it. Not nightmares with roaring or blood or attacks, just quiet ones. I would dream of breathing, of soft paws walking outside my door, of eyes blinking in the dark. What scared me most was how calm it had been. It wasn't angry. It wasn't hunting. It was just there, watching, waiting, testing. It knew I was inside. It knew I was afraid, but it wasn't in a hurry. It had time, and I didn't. I booked a small Airbnb guest house in the suburbs while visiting a friend out of state. It looked perfect in the pictures. Bright little place tucked behind someone's house, separated by a white wooden fence with its own keypad lock, a little patio with a chair and table, and some potted plants near the entrance. It was quiet, not in a busy part of town, just a long line of houses with trimmed lawns and wide driveways. The host didn't live in the main house, they just rented the guest house behind it. They sent the code and instructions the day before I arrived. The keyless entry was easy. Just punch in the digits and push the door. The first night, everything was fine. I unpacked, made some tea in the little kitchenette, and watched something on my laptop before going to bed around midnight. The bed was comfortable enough, and though the place had a bit of that artificial lemony cleaner smell, I didn't mind. It was quiet outside. No cars, no dogs barking, no people talking. Just stillness. The next day, I was out most of the afternoon, visiting my friend, walking around downtown. Got back in the evening, took a shower, then went out again to grab dinner. It was when I came back that I noticed something weird. I had plugged my phone charger into the wall near the couch. When I got back, the charger was on the floor. Not completely far off, but kind of halfway out, like it had been unplugged and dropped. At first, I didn't think too hard about it. I assumed I must have knocked it off when I left. Maybe I tugged the cord and didn't realize. I plugged it back in and forgot about it. I didn't check anything else. I wasn't the paranoid type. I double-checked the lock on the door, still set to locked. Nothing else seemed off. Third day, I went about the same routine. I left around lunchtime, hung out with my friend, and got back later in the evening. I remember feeling a little uneasy when I came back in. Not sure why. I think it was because the curtain was slightly open when I was pretty sure I'd left it fully drawn. Again, I brushed it off. I heated up some food, watched a movie in bed, then got sleepy around midnight. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. Not sure what time exactly, but close. The room was dark, just the little light on the smoke detector blinking every 10 seconds. At first, I didn't know what had woken me. I thought maybe I'd had a dream or needed to use the bathroom. Then I heard a soft clicking sound. Not loud, but distinct, like the sound of the door unlocking and the latch being released. I was lying on my side, facing the wall, and I froze. I listened hard. It was so quiet that I could hear the shift of the air in the room. Then I heard the door creak, just barely, and I turned my head slowly toward it. The door to the guest house was open about 4 inches, just enough for someone to slip in. I couldn't see anyone right away, but then I saw a shape, just a dark outline of a figure. Someone had stepped inside. One step, maybe two, then stopped. My eyes were wide open, and I felt like my heart was hammering against the mattress. I didn't move, didn't even breathe hard. The person didn't say anything. They just stood there, then after a few seconds, backed out. The door closed quietly. I heard the latch click again. I didn't get up immediately. I just lay there, trying to make sense of what had happened. My body was tense, like I was still hoping I was imagining things. After maybe a full minute, I got out of bed as quietly as I could. I walked barefoot to the door and checked it. It was closed but not locked. I turned the bolt manually, then the bottom knob. Both had been unlocked. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand, debating whether to call the police. But I didn't really have anything concrete. Nothing was stolen. No one broke in. It didn't look like forced entry. I kept checking the door over and over, then sat back down. I waited for morning. Every creak of the walls, every sound outside, made me jump. As soon as the sun started coming up, I messaged the host. I told them what happened, that I woke up and found the door open, and someone had stepped inside. I asked if anyone else had access to the unit. The host responded an hour later saying, "No, only you have the code. No one else should be entering." That's all they said. I packed my bag. I didn't wait around. I didn't bother taking a shower or having breakfast. I threw everything into my duffel, grabbed my charger, and left the key code screen flashing behind me. I got in my car and drove straight to a coffee shop on the other side of town, somewhere public, somewhere with people around. I didn't write a review. I didn't message the host again. I didn't want to deal with any of it. I spent the rest of my visit at my friend's place and took an early flight home the next day. Even now, I don't know how they got in. The keypad was digital, one of those smart locks where you punch in a code. No signs of forced entry. The host said no one else had the code, but someone walked into that unit like they belonged there. Quiet, careful, like they'd done it before. It wasn't a mistake. That wasn't someone checking the wrong door or trying the wrong unit. Whoever knew the code or had a key. They walked in at 2 a.m., stood there, and then walked out. No sound, no words, just in and out. I think about that moment a lot, the second when they paused, when they stood just inside. What were they looking at? Why didn't they come further? Why did they back out? Maybe they thought I was asleep and changed their mind. Maybe they were just checking to see if anyone was inside. Maybe they'd been there before on nights when I was gone. I'll never know, but I don't use keypads anymore. Not unless there's a deadbolt I can throw myself. I always put something heavy against the door in hotel rooms. I keep a flashlight and my phone within reach. And I haven't stayed in another detached guest house since. It was quiet. It was clean. It was cute. And someone walked in like it was nothing. I've always liked being alone in the woods. There's something about walking through trees, away from traffic and lights, that clears my head better than anything else. It's quiet, simple. I've been doing it for years, usually short weekend trips, just me, my pack, and a tent. I always checked trail maps, packed light, but smart, and made sure to leave my route with a friend. I wasn't careless. I just liked the silence. Last fall, I decided to try a new stretch of forest I'd never been to before. Public land up north, dense, barely used trails, supposedly good for those looking to disconnect. I drove up early Friday morning, parked at a small gravel lot, and started hiking in before noon. The air smelled of pine and dry leaves. The sky was clear. I felt good. The trail was marked, but not well. Just small wooden signs every half mile or so. I didn't care. I had a compass and a printed topographic map. I planned to go about 6 or 7 miles in, make camp near a small stream I'd marked, and just stay there for 2 nights. The first few hours went smooth. Barely saw another person. Passed an older man with a walking stick going the opposite way. He just nodded at me and kept going. That was the only person I saw all day. Around 4, I found the spot I'd picked out. Stream wasn't much, more like a trickle between rocks, but it would do. I set up my tent under a stand of tall fir trees and gathered some firewood. I had no cell signal, which I expected. No noise except the wind in the trees. I cooked dinner, dehydrated beef stew, and sat by the fire as the light faded. It was one of those deep, dark nights. No moon, Stars were bright through the branches. I sat by the fire for an hour or two, then climbed into the tent and fell asleep. I woke up once in the middle of the night. Heard something, not loud, just a snap, like a branch breaking, but it wasn't close. Could have been anything, a raccoon, a deer. I laid there listening for a minute. Nothing else came. I drifted off again. Next morning was normal. Cold. My breath fogged the air. I boiled water, made coffee, and ate a protein bar. I decided to explore a bit, take a loop trail that started a mile east of camp and circled back through the woods. Left my tent up, packed a day bag with water, snacks, and a first aid kit. Walked east for a while and found the fork in the trail. That's when I noticed the marks. Just past the fork on the left side of the trail, a few trees had what looked like knife cuts in the bark. Not natural scrapes from deer. Clean, straight lines like someone had used a blade. I stopped and stared at them. One had 5 cuts running down vertically, all even and deep. Another had a small symbol carved in, maybe a triangle or a pyramid. I took a picture with my old point-and-shoot camera I carried for the trip. Figured it might be nothing. Kids or something. Still, it felt strange. There was no campground nearby, no road within several miles. Who would be carving things out here? I kept walking. Did about 5 miles before circling back toward camp. Passed no one, not even a squirrel. Just birds, wind, and the crunch of my boots on dead leaves. When I got back to camp, I noticed something off. My tent flap was open. I always zipped it shut. Always. Even if I'm just walking to the stream. My pack was still inside, nothing missing, but the zipper was halfway down like someone had peeked in. I looked around. No footprints. Ground was covered in old needles and leaves. Hard to tell if anyone had been there. I felt a tightness in my chest. Could have been the wind. Maybe I didn't zip it properly. Still, I checked everything. No animals got in. Food bag was untouched. Stove and utensils were where I left them. I told myself it was fine. Still, I kept my knife in my jacket pocket for the rest of the day. I didn't go far, just stayed close to camp, gathered more wood, kept the fire going. As the sun set, I felt uneasy. It wasn't like me. I've spent nights in worse places, but something about that open flap bugged me. When it got dark, I lit the fire again and sat close to it. Every time a twig snapped in the distance, my head jerked. I kept looking into the woods, but saw nothing. Just shadows. At some point, I got too tired to stay up and crawled into the tent. I kept the knife next to me, slept in my clothes. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. It was the sound again, a soft rustle, not wind, something else. I held still, listening. It came from the direction of the stream, like someone stepping slowly through leaves. I unzipped the tent a couple inches and peeked out. Couldn't see anything. The fire had burned down to ash. I waited, holding my breath. Heard the sound again. Closer now. Not fast. Careful steps. I stayed like that for 15, 20 minutes, knife in hand, heart pounding. Eventually, the sounds faded. I never saw anyone. Never saw anything. I waited another hour, staring out, eyes burning. Then I finally laid back down, still dressed, but didn't sleep. Not really. In the morning, I packed up fast. Didn't cook, didn't eat. Just stuffed everything into my pack and got out. I kept checking behind me as I walked, scanning the trees. I took the same trail back toward the lot, hiking fast. About halfway there, I found more carvings. A different set of trees deeper in. This time, they weren't random. It was a line of them, 6 trees in a row, all marked with slashes at head height. Same spacing, same depth. It felt deliberate. I took more pictures. I started walking even faster. I just wanted to be back in my car. I'd never been scared like this before. I wasn't imagining it. Something wasn't right. When I finally got back to the parking area, I saw something that froze me. Another car was parked next to mine. It was old, beat-up gray sedan. No plates. Dirt caked over the windows. Looked like it hadn't moved in years, but I knew it wasn't there when I arrived. The dust wasn't that thick, and it was still warm to the touch. I didn't stop to figure it out. I unlocked my car, threw my pack in the back, and left. Didn't look back. Didn't eat until I was over an hour down the highway. When I got home, I looked over the photos I took, especially the ones of the carvings. I zoomed in, checked them one by one. That triangle I saw earlier, it wasn't just a triangle. It had an eye inside it. Rough, crude, but there. The others were just slashes, but consistent. Too consistent to be random. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing the trees, the shadows, that moment where I heard someone walking but never saw them. I didn't tell anyone right away. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe someone else was out there, some weird camper or survivalist. Maybe it was just coincidence. A few weeks later, I decided to check online just to see if anyone else had seen the same carvings. I found a few mentions, not many. A post on a forum from years ago talked about the same woods. A guy said he found watcher marks carved in trees. Another one mentioned hearing footsteps outside his tent. One of them ended the thread by saying they would never go back to that part of the forest again. No follow-ups, no replies. What really made my skin crawl was a small article I stumbled on from a local paper written about 5 years ago. A hiker was found dead in the same area. Cause of death never determined. No visible wounds. His gear was all there, but he was found lying face down just 100 yards from where I'd camped. They said there were strange symbols carved into a tree near him. Police called it likely unrelated. That was enough for me. I never went back. I still hike, still camp, but not there, not near that forest. I kept the pictures for a while. Then I deleted them. Didn't want them on my computer. Didn't want to think about it. Even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I hear those same slow footsteps in the leaves. Just soft, just outside the window, but there's never anything there. I get up, look outside. Just dark trees and silence. I tell myself it was just some strange person in the woods. Maybe a hermit. Maybe some twisted loner marking trees for reasons I'll never understand. But deep down, I know I wasn't alone out there. I know someone was watching. Maybe from the first day. Maybe longer. And I know one thing for sure. I should have never unzipped that tent. I should have never looked. Because even now, when it's quiet and still at night, I can still see the shape of those marks carved deep into the bark. And I can still hear the sound of something walking slowly through dry leaves. Not fast, just steady, like they were never in a rush, like they knew I would leave, but they'd still be there. I was house sitting for a friend's family cabin deep in the woods. It wasn't a vacation home or some sleek Airbnb. This was an old, slightly leaning wooden place in the middle of nowhere, about 40 minutes of dirt roads from the nearest highway, with no cell signal. My friend said his parents used it mostly for hunting trips or long weekends away from town. They weren't using it for the rest of the month and knew I needed some time alone, so they offered it. I agreed right away. I needed the quiet. The cabin was basic, just a main room with a small kitchen, a wood-burning stove, a bedroom and back, and a cramped bathroom with a low ceiling. A narrow porch wrapped around the front. No TV, no internet, just a radio and a few books stacked on a nightstand. The only nearby structure was a small woodshed out back, about 20 feet from the back door, tucked under a tall spruce. It had a heavy-looking padlock on the door. Before leaving, my friend gave me a quick rundown: how to prime the water pump, how to jiggle the door to get it to close properly, how to use the stove. Then he pointed out the shed. "Don't worry about that," he said. "It's just firewood. My dad keeps it locked so animals don't get in." I didn't think much of it. There was already a stack of chopped wood by the porch, more than enough for my short stay. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I cooked simple meals, read, and went to sleep early. The quiet out there was intense. No cars, no people, no power lines humming. Just wind in the trees and the occasional creak of the cabin. At night it got cold, even though it was late spring. I kept a fire going in the stove and used 2 blankets. It took a while to fall asleep both nights because of how dark it got, pitch black. The kind of dark that makes you feel like your eyes are closed even when they're open. On the 3rd night, sometime past midnight, I was pulled out of sleep by a sudden, loud metallic slam. My heart jumped. It wasn't the kind of sound you imagine in a dream. It was sharp and real. I lay still for a moment, trying to listen. At first, nothing. Then another noise. A soft creak, then a light, rhythmic tap. Would shifting maybe, or something bumping lightly. I got out of bed and moved slowly to the window that faced the back of the property. It was hard to see at first. I pressed my face to the glass, trying to adjust to the darkness. Then I saw movement. The woodshed door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. The padlock was still hanging from the latch, unlocked. That made no sense. I threw on a hoodie and grabbed the flashlight. My first thought was that maybe the lock hadn't been fully clicked in and just fell off. Or maybe the wood inside had shifted and pushed the door open. But as I got closer, I started feeling a tight knot form in my chest. The ground was soft from recent rain, and my flashlight caught deep boot prints around the shed. Not mine. I never walked over there until now. I stopped just a few feet from the door and shined the light inside. The shed wasn't big, maybe 8 by 8 feet. The stacked firewood along the left wall was untouched. Nothing had spilled over. No fallen tools. Just crates on the right side. A shovel leaned into the corner. Then I caught sight of something behind crates. Not immediately visible unless you really stepped inside. I hesitated. I don't know why I went further in. I told myself I needed to see to know what made the sound. I stepped around the crates and froze. In the back corner was a small pile of women's clothes, neatly folded. Jeans, a sweater, a jacket, some socks tucked into a pair of sneakers. A small drawstring bag lay beside them. There was also a half-empty plastic water bottle, slightly crushed in an energy bar wrapper. The strangest thing was a scarf. I recognized it immediately. It had been hanging on the wall hook inside the cabin when I got there. I noticed it because it still had a tag on it. A gift, maybe, but it wasn't there anymore. I backed out of the shed, heart pounding. The lock hadn't been broken or damaged. It had been opened. That meant someone had a key. I walked back to the cabin fast, shut the back door, and locked it. I stood there for a minute, listening. Nothing, just the wind. But the fear didn't go away. I checked the front door. Locked. The windows were all shut. I turned off the lights and sat on the couch with my back against the wall, flashlight in one hand, a fire poker in the other. I didn't sleep. At first light, I stepped out again. I walked back to the shed. The door was closed now, locked back in place. Clicked shut. I hadn't done that. I didn't go inside this time. I just walked the perimeter looking for anything else. I saw the same boot prints, now dried and cracked. They led out from the back of the shed into the trees. I followed them for a while, probably 50 or 60 feet, until they veered off behind a thick patch of brush. Then I saw something else. A tree stump, freshly cut, with a folded tarp on top. Beneath it, a sleeping bag, some trash, and a few more clothes. Someone had been camping there. No tent, just hidden out behind the shed, out of sight from the cabin. I backed away and walked straight to the cabin. I locked the doors, packed my things as quickly as I could, and left. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I told my friend what I found. He was shocked, said his parents hadn't been up there in months. Said the key to the shed was inside the cabin, in a drawer. When he went to check a few days later, the drawer was empty. He called the local sheriff. They went out and looked around, but didn't find anyone. Said it was probably a drifter or someone passing through. Maybe using the shed for shelter, thinking the cabin was empty. That was the official take. But I don't know. The clothes inside the shed were clean, folded. The food and water, recent. Someone had been staying there more than once. Watching, maybe, coming and going. The scarf being taken from inside the cabin is what stays with me the most. That meant whoever it was hadn't just broken into the shed. They had been inside the cabin too. While I was there, I haven't gone back since. It was late September, just cold enough that the nights could get uncomfortable without a good sleeping bag, but not so cold that it kept us from heading out for the weekend. My buddy Jake and I had decided on a dispersed camping spot deep in the national forest, miles off any paved road. It wasn't a real campground. No restrooms, no picnic tables, no designated fire rings. Just forest, which was exactly what we wanted. We'd found a spot earlier that day after driving slowly down a bumpy Forest Service road for a while. The clearing was just big enough for our 2 tents, with a ring of trees on all sides. There was a fire pit someone had made out of rocks, which saved us the trouble of building one. We got our tents set up by mid-afternoon and spent the rest of the daylight hours hiking a bit and gathering deadwood for the fire. We weren't expecting to see anyone. This was the kind of place where you had to really want to be away from people to find it. No signs, no cell service, no power lines. Just pines and silence. We weren't idiots, though. We both brought protection. I kept my handgun in a side pouch on my pack, and Jake had us locked in his truck. Not because we were paranoid or trying to play tough, but because you never really know who or what might show up in the middle of nowhere. That night, we got the fire going just before it got dark. It was clear, stars all over the sky, a crescent moon hanging low. We cooked some food over the fire, drank a couple beers, and just sat, listening to the crackle of the wood and the distant sounds of the forest. Every now and then we'd hear an owl or some small animal moving through the brush, but nothing unusual. Just normal forest sounds. It was late, real late. Sometime after 1 a.m., maybe 2. Neither of us had a watch on, and like I said, there was no signal. We were just sitting near the fire, kind of zoned out, half talking, half staring into the flames. Jake had gotten up to stretch and wandered over toward the tents, which were about 10 or 15 feet away, when we both heard it, the low rumble of a motor. Far off at first, but getting louder. It was strange. We hadn't seen another car for at least an hour before we even turned off the main forest road to get to the site. It was the kind of place you didn't just stumble onto. You had to look for it. So the sound of an engine that late at night didn't feel right. Jake and I both stopped moving and just listened. The fire crackled. The engine got closer. The trees blocked most of the view, so we couldn't see headlights at first, just the glow through the trunks as the vehicle approached. Then it turned off the main Forest Service road and started down the same rough path we had taken hours earlier. It was coming straight for us. Jake walked back toward me. Neither of us said anything. He reached into the gear bag by the tent and grabbed his flashlight. I stood up slowly, moved toward the front of the campsite where the truck would pull in, and pulled my handgun from its holster. I wasn't aiming it at anything. I just held it down at my side. But I held it in a way that made it obvious it was there. The headlights swung wide as the truck came into the clearing. It was a pickup, old, loud, and lifted high off the ground. The kind of thing you see on back roads and don't ask too many questions about. It pulled halfway into the site and then stopped. The engine kept running. The light stayed on. For a moment, nothing happened. Jake, without saying a word, walked around behind me and turned on his flashlight. But not just in any direction. He aimed it right at my back. It lit me up completely, turning me into a silhouette. Just a solid figure, standing still, holding a gun. Anyone sitting in the cab of that truck saw exactly what they needed to see. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just stood there. The engine idled for another few seconds. Then the truck shifted into reverse. The tires crunched as it backed up slowly, then turned and drove back out the way it came. The red glow of the taillights faded through the trees, and the sound of the engine got quieter and quieter until it was gone. I stood there for a long time after that, maybe a full minute. Jake stayed behind me with the light on. Neither of us said anything. Eventually, I lowered my arm and walked back toward the fire. My legs felt heavy. My heartbeat had finally started to slow down, but there was still that tight feeling in my chest. We sat down again, but it wasn't the same. The night felt different now, less peaceful, more alert. Every sound in the forest felt closer, more intentional. We kept the fire going a little longer than we normally would have, like the light itself gave us some kind of safety. Jake never said much, but I could tell he was thinking the same things I was. Who were they? Why did they pull in? There were no signs leading to this place. No indication from the road that anyone was camped here. No one would have just stumbled onto it, not at that hour. That meant they knew about it. Maybe they camped here before. Maybe they used it for something else. Whatever it was, they saw us, saw that we were armed, and they left. Quickly. I don't think they were lost. You don't drive that deep into the woods in the middle of the night looking for directions. And if you're just out for a drive, you don't take the roughest, narrowest turnoff you can find. They were looking for something. Or someone. We didn't sleep well that night. I stayed in my tent with the gun tucked under the sleeping bag by my hip. Every little noise outside made me open my eyes and listen hard. At one point, I thought I heard a vehicle again, far off, but it might have just been my imagination. It never got closer if it was real. By the time the sky started to lighten, we were already packing up. We didn't talk much. We just took down the tents, loaded the gear, and got out of there. Once we were back on the main road and had a few miles between us and that spot, We both kind of exhaled for the first time. We talked a bit about what happened. Agreed it was smart not to say anything or move too fast. Agreed we weren't going back to that area again. There are too many places to camp out there to take that kind of risk twice. And I've thought a lot about that night since. About how close it might have come to going a different way. If I hadn't stood still, if Jake hadn't lit me up with that flashlight, if I hadn't had the gun on me, who knows what would have happened? Maybe nothing. Maybe something very bad. The truth is, when you're out in the woods that far from help, you're the only line between safety and danger. Cell phones don't work. Rangers don't patrol. If something goes wrong, you're on your own. So yeah, I believe in being prepared. I believe in protecting yourself. Not because I want trouble, but because sometimes trouble finds you. And when it does, you'd better be ready to show it that you're not an easy target. That night could have ended a dozen different ways. I'm glad it ended with tail lights disappearing into the woods and not something worse. My boyfriend and I had been planning the weekend for weeks. Just the two of us. No work, no emails, no traffic, nothing. We found a rental cabin online that looked simple but cozy. Wood-paneled walls, a small stone fireplace, a porch with a mountain view. It wasn't far from the main highway, but it sat just high enough into the mountains that you felt removed from everything. The pictures looked good, the price was decent, and the reviews were mostly positive. A few people said the drive up was rough, but nothing we couldn't handle. We left just after lunch on Friday, loaded the car with food, blankets, wine, a Bluetooth speaker, and a couple of old books we never had time to finish. The drive took longer than expected. The roads twisted a lot more than they looked on the map, and cell service dropped about 20 minutes before we got there. The GPS lagged, and we missed one turn, which added even more time. By the time we reached the driveway, the sun was already low in the sky. The place didn't look exactly like the photos. The siding was faded, the porch railing was warped in a few spots, and there was some moss on the roof. One of the shutters hung loose. I felt a small knot in my stomach, but the key worked. The door creaked open with a low groan. Inside was better, old but not terrible. It smelled faintly like cedar and dust. The floorboards creaked, and the windows were streaked with grime, but the furniture matched the photos. A simple couch, a small wooden table, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove. The bedroom had a double bed with clean sheets. It was livable. We unpacked our bags, made grilled cheese and soup on the stove, opened a bottle of red wine, and played cards at the kitchen table. After dinner, we sat on the porch for a while, wrapped in blankets, listening to the forest. It was quiet in that way that feels heavy. No traffic, no voices, just the sound of wind through trees and the occasional rustle in the underbrush. Around 9:30, the cold started to creep in, and we went back inside. At around 10, just as we were getting ready for bed, headlights cut through the front window. They lit up the cabin from the driveway, bright and sudden. We both froze. No one should have been out here. The cabin was supposed to be isolated, and we hadn't seen another house for at least a couple of miles. The car engine cut off. We heard doors slam. Then came shouting. A man's voice, loud and angry, then a woman's voice joining in. I couldn't make out the words at first. We stepped away from the window, and my boyfriend opened the door crack. The man stood at the bottom of the steps, holding his phone up like he was about to call someone. He was older than us, maybe mid-40s. The woman stood beside him with her arms crossed. They both looked furious. "What the hell are you doing in our cabin?" he said. My boyfriend tried to explain. He walked out onto the porch with his phone in his hand, showing them the rental confirmation. I stayed inside, watching through the screen door. They looked confused, then skeptical. Then the woman opened her own phone, and her face changed. The man took a step back. They talked for a few minutes, going back and forth. And finally the man said, "There's another cabin up the road. Almost identical. About 200 yards through the trees. Yours must be that one." We apologized. A lot. They weren't happy, but they weren't violent or anything. They just wanted us gone. We packed up quickly, embarrassed, stuffing food and toiletries into bags. I could feel my hands shaking. Not from fear, just that awkward panic when you realize you've made a huge mistake. It took us about 20 minutes to gather everything. The guy stood out in the cold watching the whole time, arms folded. The woman sat in the car. When we pulled out of the driveway, I caught a last glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, still watching. We found the other cabin after a little searching. It was set slightly downhill behind a stand of pine trees. Same build, same size, but a little better maintained. The porch light was already on, and the keypad on the front door matched our code. This was the right one. We went inside, still rattled, but glad to be out of the awkward situation. Everything looked fine. Nothing fell off at first. The sheets were folded on the bed, the kitchen was clean, and there was a welcome note on the counter with our names on it. We unpacked again, tried to laugh it off, and had a second glass of wine before bed. But my head was buzzing with thoughts. We had been in someone else's cabin. They had walked in, shocked to find strangers inside. But what bothered me more was the in-between time, when we were inside their place, thinking it was ours. What if they hadn't shown up? What if they had gotten there after we were already asleep? What if they hadn't come back at all? Because that meant someone else had access to that place. And whoever had built or owned these cabins had kept them nearly identical. Same layout, same furniture, same porch swing. It was easy to confuse them, especially in the dark. Later that night, while lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. My boyfriend was already out cold. I kept going over things in my head. We had been completely alone in the wrong place for several hours. Anyone could have shown up. Anyone could have been nearby, watching, trying the door. Hell, we hadn't even locked it the first hour we were there. Then I remembered something small, something I hadn't really noticed earlier. When we first walked into the wrong cabin, the couch cushions had been a little off, like someone had just gotten up. One of the kitchen chairs had been pulled away from the table, not tucked in like the others. The trash can had a used tissue in it. I thought maybe the cleaning crew had missed it, or maybe it was just old trash. But now it felt different, like someone had been there recently, maybe even earlier that day. It stuck with me, even into the morning. When I got up, I looked out the bedroom window. Trees, mist, nothing strange. I checked the locks. Front door, back door, windows. Everything was shut tight, but there were 2 coffee cups in the cabinet, and one had lipstick on the rim. Neither of us wore any. That's when I started to feel it in my stomach again, that cold grip of something not being quite right. We stayed the next night, mostly because we didn't want to explain everything to the rental company, and partly because we were too tired to drive back down. But I barely slept. Every time the floor creaked, I imagined someone else had a key, someone who had used this place before, someone who had maybe been watching us from a distance, in that weird twilight time before the real owners of the other cabin pulled in. We left first thing the next morning. Didn't even eat breakfast. Just packed up and drove in silence for most of the way down a mountain. I kept checking the mirror, not because I expected to see anything, but because I couldn't stop myself. It felt like we had walked too far into someone else's life, and now we were leaving the door open behind us. I didn't leave a review. I didn't want to think about it again, but I kept the reservation email. I don't know why. Maybe just in case. Maybe to remind myself to never trust photos too much. Maybe to remember that sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see. It's not knowing how long someone might have been watching before you notice them at all. My brother and I rented a cabin way up north in Michigan for a week of hunting. It was late October, cold but not unbearable. The kind of weather where your breath fogs up in the morning, but the afternoons are crisp and quiet. We'd both been working long hours all year, and this was supposed to be our break. No phone signal, no Wi-Fi, no other cabins for miles. Just thick woods and a dirt road that got narrower the deeper you went. We wanted that. Total silence. Just us and the trees. The cabin was small but solid. 2 bedrooms, a basic kitchen, a wood stove, and a generator that we used only when we needed to charge things. We brought our own food, extra water, flashlights, everything. We were prepared. There was a front porch and a narrow path that led around to the back door, which opened near the kitchen. A thick tree lean wrapped the place tight, almost like the woods were pressing in on it. We barely saw any animals during the day, but that wasn't strange. Deer keep quiet when they sense people. The first 2 days were peaceful. We didn't get anything, but we didn't care. We set up a blind a few hundred yards into the woods, sat there for hours just listening. The wind through the branches, the odd rustle of a squirrel or bird, distant creaks from old trees moving, natural sounds. At night, we make a fire out front, cook something simple, and sit in the dark with our beers. The stars were clear, no planes, no headlights, nothing. It started the third night. We were inside, finishing up dinner. The fire had gone out maybe an hour earlier, and we were getting ready to turn in. That's when we heard it. 3 sharp knocks. Not like something falling or the wind brushing branches. Real knocks. Fast and even. 1, 2, 3. Then nothing. We looked at each other. It had come from the back door, near the kitchen. We waited, didn't move. I thought maybe it was a branch or an animal rubbing against the wood. But nothing followed. No steps, no sounds in the leaves, just silence. We grabbed our flashlights and went out through the front. Circled around slowly. Nothing was there. No movement. No animals bolting. The leaves were undisturbed. The ground was a bit wet from an earlier drizzle, and we didn't see a single track. We stood out there for a while, shining the lights into the trees, watching for movement. Eventually we went back inside, locked the doors again. About 25 minutes later, another set of knocks. Same spot. Back door. Same pattern. 1, 2, 3. We moved fast this time, opened the door right away, and stepped out. The woods were dead quiet. Not sound. Our breath looked thick in the flashlight beams. We checked the whole perimeter again. Nothing. We stood out back for maybe 10 minutes, shining the lights in all directions, listening. Still nothing. We even checked the roof line, just in case, though we had no idea what we were even looking for. It happened again, but not at the back door. While we were out back, we heard it. 1, 2, 3, from the front door, right where we had just been. That was when something shifted in me. Not fear exactly, not yet, but unease, a kind of awareness. It didn't make sense. Something would have had to move around the cabin while we were doing the same, and we didn't hear a damn thing. We ran around to the front. Still nothing. Again, no tracks, no movement, no sound. The woods were quiet, almost too quiet. You start noticing that kind of silence when you're used to hearing small things, owls, bugs, even the wind. It was like everything had paused. We stayed inside the rest of the night, barely speaking. Every 20 to 30 minutes, the knocks came back. Sometimes front, sometimes back. Always 3. Always sharp and fast. Never random, never muffled. And every time we checked, there was no sign of anything. I started timing them, checking my watch. 29 minutes, then 32, then 28. It wasn't mechanical, not like a sensor or timer. It felt deliberate, like someone pacing themselves. Around 3 a.m., we stayed outside. We picked the front porch and sat in the dark, no lights, trying to catch whatever it was. We had our rifles next to us, not because we thought we'd need them, but just to feel like we had something. We waited a long time. Cold seeped into our clothes. Still nothing. Then, like before, 1, 2, 3. From the back this time, we ran around, light beams bouncing off trees. Nothing. The noise had come from the back door, and I was sure it hadn't been more than 30 seconds since we were looking that way. It was like something was moving around without stepping on leaves. No sound of running. No snapping twigs. Just knocks. We stayed up till the sky started to lighten. No more knocks after that. Just silence again. At first light, we packed. We didn't even eat. We just stuffed everything back into the truck, gear, coolers, bedding. We didn't speak much. It wasn't panic. It was more like we both understood something was wrong, and staying wasn't worth figuring it out. The road out was bumpy and narrow, and the trees still looked like they were leaning in too close. I remember checking the rear view mirror more than usual, half expecting to see something in the road behind us, but there was nothing. When we got to the main road and got a few bars of signal, I looked up local animal behavior, pranks, weird stories, anything that might explain it. Nothing matched. Raccoons don't knock. Bears don't knock. People don't sneak around cabins all night, knocking every half hour without leaving prints. We didn't report anything. What would we say? That something was knocking but never showed itself? That we were grown men who got scared of sounds? No one would have taken it seriously. We still talk about it sometimes. Quietly. Like it only happened halfway. Like a dream. But I remember those knocks perfectly. Always 3. Always sharp. Always fast. We haven't gone back since. I booked the Airbnb because I needed a break. Nothing fancy, just a small solo retreat to clear my head after a few stressful months. The listing was for a modest, older house on the edge of small town. It wasn't updated or modern, but the review said it was clean and quiet, and that's all I cared about. I didn't want crowds or a hotel lobby. I wanted silence, a place to read, sleep, maybe go for walks. Somewhere no one would bother me. The house had 2 bedrooms, even though I'd only be using one. I figured maybe it had once been a family home. It had that feel. Lived in, but not in a bad way. The furniture was old, but not broken. The couch was a little saggy in the middle, and the wooden floors creaked in certain spots, especially near the kitchen. There were a few outdated decorations, a dusty fake plant in the hallway, an old clock that didn't tick anymore, but everything was clean. No bugs, no grime, just a little worn, which made it feel more like someone's house than a rental. I actually liked that. The first 2 days went by quietly. I read a lot, took naps, cooked simple meals, walked around the neighborhood, which was quiet and kind of sleepy. No one waved, but no one stared either. It felt like a place people went to be left alone. It was cloudy the whole time, gray skies, a bit of wind in the trees, but that didn't bother me. I barely even checked my phone. It was just what I needed. The third night, something changed. I was brushing my teeth when I felt a draft in the hallway. It wasn't a strong gust or anything, just a cool flow of air near my feet that made the hair on my legs stand up. The heat was on low, so it didn't make sense. I walked over, barefoot on the wood, and tried to figure out where it was coming from. The window at the end of the hallway was shut. No vents down there either. But the wall, something about the wall didn't seem right. It was the left side, across from the second bedroom, I wasn't using. The wall looked normal at first. White paint, a few scuff marks. But when I stood close, I noticed a narrow seam running about 2 feet above the floorboard, like where 2 panels met. It wasn't very visible unless the light hit it just right. I knelt down and touched it. Hello. I knocked lightly, and it didn't sound like the rest of the wall. There was a different tone, less dense, like there was an empty space behind it. I told myself to stop, that it didn't matter. Maybe it was just a patch or an old repair. But then I saw something strange near the baseboard, just the tiniest gap, maybe from the house settling over time. I don't know what made me press on that part. Maybe it was just curiosity, maybe something deeper. But when I pushed gently with my thumb, I felt a small click. The panel shifted inward. I froze. My heart started to beat faster. I didn't open it all the way right away. I just stayed still, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. No sound, no movement. I pushed a little more, and the panel swung open, revealing a narrow, dark space behind the wall. It was a hidden room. Not even a full room, more like a crawl space or a passage, but bigger than a closet. It was about 6 feet deep, maybe 3 feet wide. Enough for someone to lie down in. There was a cot, thin mattress stained, a blanket rolled up at the end. Next to it was a pile of empty wrappers, granola bars, chips, little packs of peanuts. A couple of water bottles. One was half full. There was a small plastic bin with what looked like some clothes stuffed inside, and a phone charger, plugged into an outlet tucked into the wall. It was the kind of charger you'd find anywhere, cheap, frayed near the connector, but it meant someone had been using it. Recently, I didn't touch anything. I just stood there, staring at it. The air smelled musty. Not like rot, but like someone had been sweating in there. Breathing, living. The panic hit me all at once. My chest got tight, my skin went cold. I turned around and walked straight out of the hallway, grabbed my phone, and snapped a bunch of pictures of the open panel, the cot, the food, the charger, everything. Then I packed. Fast. I didn't stop to eat or even change. I shoved everything into my bag, threw on my jacket, and walked out the front door. I didn't care that it was late. I didn't care that I hadn't booked another place yet. I got in my car and drove 20 miles to the next town, checking into a motel off the highway that smelled like mildew and cigarettes. It didn't matter. I locked the door and stayed up most of the night with the lights on. In the morning, I sent the pictures to Airbnb support. I explained what I'd found, described everything in detail. I wasn't dramatic about it. I just gave them the facts. No one should be renting a house with a hidden space like that. Someone had clearly been staying there, and it wasn't a guest. They said they'd look into it. That was it. I didn't expect much else. But when I checked the listing again a few days later, it was gone. Just disappeared. No unavailable message, no forwarding link. Nothing. It stayed gone too. I kept checking for weeks out of morbid curiosity. The host profile vanished. Reviews still showed up in my app history, but the property was completely wiped. I never got a follow-up from Airbnb beyond a generic thank you and a voucher for future booking. I don't know who was using that space. I don't know if it was the owner or someone the owner didn't know about. I don't know how long they'd been living there or if they'd watched me while I stayed. The panel wasn't locked. It could have been open from either side. That's the part one can't shake. I keep thinking back to little things. The way I sometimes felt like the hallway floor creaked when I wasn't standing on it. The way I'd find the bathroom light on in the morning when I swore I'd turn it off. How one of my protein bars went missing from my bag, and I assumed I'd just eaten it and forgotten. I don't know. I'll never know. But I haven't stayed in a house Airbnb since. Only hotels now. Ones with cameras in the hallway, a front desk, and a lock I know no one else has a key to. We got up there late in the afternoon, the kind of timing where the shadows are already starting to stretch long across the trees and the sunlight looks golden, like honey, pouring through the leaves. My sister and I were both excited. This was supposed to be a fun, quiet weekend. Just the two of us and our dogs for the first night. Then our boyfriends would join us the next day. It was a big, open, dispersed camping area tucked way back in the Rockies. The kind of place where you could set up camp miles from the next person if you wanted. No cell service, no bathrooms, nothing official. Just nature and whoever else decided to be out there with you. We had driven around for maybe half an hour, trying to find the right spot. A lot of the more obvious campsites were already taken, but eventually we found this wide, flat clearing at the end of a rough dirt track. It looked like it hadn't been used in a while. Big fire ring, some logs for sitting, a bit of a rise behind it that sloped up into thick trees. It felt private, but not boxed in. Perfect. We had just pulled up and opened the back of the car when the two guys showed up. They came walking down the same dirt track we'd just driven in on, like they'd been waiting. No gear, no backpacks, nothing that said they were camping. Just the two of them, mid-30s maybe, both in jeans and hoodies. One of them had this look in his eyes, like he was trying too hard to seem casual. The other one kept scanning behind us, like he was more interested in our stuff than us. Before they even said a word, both dogs went off. My blue heeler, always a little on edge, but never aggressive without cause, bolted forward on the leash and started barking like I'd never heard before, sharp, fast, warning barks with his hackles raised all down his back. My sister's dog, the Norwegian elk hound, is usually a little more mellow, but that dog growled low, deep in his chest, and stood with his whole body between us and the men. The hair on his shoulders stood straight up, and he wasn't barking. He was just locked in on them, unmoving. The two guys stopped dead in their tracks, kind of laughed it off at first, said something about partying, but their eyes shifted. It was like they didn't expect resistance, like they thought two girls alone would just be an easy in. But the dogs didn't let up. They were pulling so hard we had to dig in our heels. The heeler was practically choking himself, trying to get closer. The elk hound looked like a statue made of coiled tension. And those guys? They turned right around and left. No argument, no attempt to joke or talk their way through it. They just spun on their heels and walked back up the track the way they came, fast like they were spooked. I wish that had been the end of it. We figured they were just being stupid. Maybe they were drunk already or high or something. We didn't see where they went, and there was no sign of another camp nearby. We tried to shake it off and focus on getting set up. We were losing light. Got the tent up, unrolled the sleeping pads, set up the fire pit. Tried to laugh it off. But those dogs, they weren't letting it go. Even after the guys were out of sight, they kept facing that direction. Ears up, eyes wide, tails stiff. As night fell, we kept the fire going big. Neither of us said it, but neither of us wanted to be in the dark without it. We made some food, sat around, tried to act normal, but we both kept glancing toward the trees. The dogs wouldn't lay down, not once. Every little sound had them keyed up again. It wasn't windy, but branches would creak now and then, and every time, both dogs would shoot to attention, bodies low, heads up. Then we saw them again. Not both at once, just a glimpse. One of them walking behind our car, maybe 50 feet away. Not toward us, just behind like he was circling. No flashlight, no reason to be there. He wasn't stumbling like he was lost. He was slow, deliberate. He didn't look at us, didn't make a sound. Just walked past, disappeared into the dark. The healer went ballistic. My sister had to grab his leash with both hands. The elk hound stood at the edge of the firelight and stared hard into the trees. We shined our flashlights in the direction he'd gone, but we couldn't see anything. Just woods. We stayed up as late as we could. The dogs didn't relax, not for a second. Every half hour or so, one of us thought we saw movement in the trees. Shadows that didn't belong. Sometimes we'd hear a twig snap or the crunch of a footstep on pine needles, but it was never close enough to be sure. It was like they were watching, waiting. There are no bathrooms up there. We'd brought a shovel, obviously, and had picked a spot during daylight hours a good distance from camp. But there was no way we were going out there now. We just stayed near the fire, stayed alert, try not to let the fear take over. Eventually, sometime well past midnight, we dragged the tent right next to the fire and pulled the dogs inside with us. We didn't sleep. Not really. Just laid there, fully clothed, knives within reach, our bear spray on the floor between us, with the dogs stiff and listening to everything. The healer would growl low now and then, and the elk hound never once laid down the whole night. Nothing happened, not directly, but we knew they were out there, just past the firelight, just out of sight. Morning came slow. The woods were too quiet. Usually there'd be birds, chipmunks, all kinds of noise. But that morning it was still and cold. We packed slowly, not saying much. We didn't want to look paranoid in case someone else was watching from the woods. But we kept the dogs close and eyes open. All day we saw those guys again. Not together. One would pass on the hill above the site, just visible through the trees. Another time, I saw one lower down the slope like he'd been trying to sneak closer and then dip back when he realized we'd seen him. Always alone, always pretending like they were just walking. But they never had packs, never had gear, never acted like they belonged out there. And they weren't going to the bathroom. There's nowhere out there to go but deeper into the woods or back to a vehicle. They were circling, watching, waiting. By early evening the next day, we heard the sound of an engine coming down the track. Our boyfriends. 2 trucks, both loaded up with gear and loud. The second they pulled in, something shifted. I didn't realize how tight my chest had been until I saw them get out and wave at us. The dogs, for the first time in almost 24 hours, relaxed. Not totally, but they dropped their guard just enough to sit down. We didn't tell them everything right away. Just said we had a weird feeling, asked them to keep an eye out. That night, no one saw anyone walking by. The guy stayed up late by the fire, had some beers, told stories, and even then, the dogs stayed calm. It was like those 2 men had disappeared. The next morning, we packed up early. No one said it, but none of us wanted to stay another night. As we drove out, I kept looking in the rearview mirror, watching the trees, wondering how close they'd really gotten, wondering how far they would have gone if we'd been alone one more night, wondering what might have happened if we hadn't had the dogs. I don't think they were just curious. I don't think they were just high or drunk. I think they were waiting for the right moment. And I think those dogs are the only reason that moment never came. I was solo camping in a quiet part of a wildlife management area in southern Florida. I'd been to this spot before and liked it because it was remote but still close enough to get a signal with my Garmin if needed. It wasn't a proper campground, just a patch of clear ground off a dirt trail about a mile off a narrow fire road, barely wide enough for my truck to squeeze through. The kind of place no one came to unless they meant to. That's what I liked about it. The forecast called for clear skies and cool nights, so I went light. No canopy or big tent, just my usual one-person bivvy-style setup I could pack up in less than a minute if I had to. I parked the truck where I could back it up and turn around without trouble if I needed a bolt. Before I even set up camp, I did a walk around. There were no fresh tracks or signs of recent visitors. I always scanned for trash, boot prints, broken branches, anything that told me someone else had been there recently. But looked clean. I set my usual tripwire perimeter with the fishing line low enough to not be obvious, strung across 3 sides of my camp. On the fourth side was the slope toward the creek, too thick to come up without making a racket. I placed my worn pair of men's sneakers just outside the bivvy, near a spare camp chair I never used. That chair was there for anyone watching a little visual lie. Maybe they'd think there was someone else. Everything else stayed in the truck or in my pack. My headlamp stayed on, the red light glowing faintly. I had a scream alarm clipped to my belt, pepper spray to my right, knife on the left, machete sheathed and resting on top of my pack, and the .38 tucked into the sticky holster between my chest and my sports bra. The big gator hunting spotlight was at my side, batteries charged. Shoes unlaced, but right next to me. I had my dash cam running in the truck, pointed toward the fire pit and my sleeping area. I double-checked the Garmin. Tracking was on, signal strong. I messaged my check-in contact that I was down for the night. The sun dropped fast, like it does in the woods. I stayed up by the fire until about 10:30, listening, just taking in the wind and the bugs and the rustle of raccoons and armadillos in the brush. A barred owl called off to the west. Nothing unusual. I put out the fire completely, drank some water, stretched, then zipped myself into the bivvy. The first few hours were normal. Light sleep, tossing a bit. I woke at around 2 a.m., like I usually do. It was still. No wind, no bugs. Dead quiet. That kind of silence always wakes me. Something always moves through the woods when everything else stops. I stayed still for a few minutes, just listening. The red light was still on, dim, but enough to see the shapes of my gear nearby. Then I heard it, a faint crunch. Just one. Not a branch break, not a twig snap, but the sound of weight on dry leaf litter. Human weight. It was off to the north, not far from where the trail came in. I lifted the flap of my bivvy just enough to reach out, got my hand on the spotlight, then eased the machete closer. I didn't move fast. I didn't want to make noise if they weren't close yet. Then I heard another crunch. Closer, followed by another, and then nothing. That kind of pause is always worse than the noise. They were listening too, trying to figure out if they'd been heard. I grabbed the .38 and slowly worked the zipper down just enough to ease out. I left the bivvy behind and crouched low, staying next to the fire ring. I had the spotlight ready in my left hand, pistol in the right. My breathing was steady, quiet. I counted 30 seconds. Nothing. Then another sound, a slight click. I knew that sound. A zipper. Not mine. Not close. Not a pack. Maybe a tent. I couldn't tell, but it wasn't natural. I stayed still. That sound had come from the opposite side, behind me, closer to the slope. I felt the air shift. My trip line on the creek side was never needed before, but maybe tonight it was. A new sound, faint but steady. Breathing. A whisper of it. I shined a red light toward the truck. Nothing. Toward the slope. And there it was, just for a second, the faintest outline of something, someone low in the brush. Not moving, just watching. The red light didn't give me much, but I saw the curve of a shoulder, the slight shift of someone tilting their head. That was enough for me. I hit the spotlight full blast, beaming it directly at the figure, then swung it across to the north where I'd first heard the crunching. Another figure ducked, low behind the palmettos, just beyond the tree lean. I backed toward the truck fast, still aiming the light to blind and disorient. Whoever they were, they didn't run. They just crouched and held still. That was worse than running. I opened the driver's side door and threw the machete and spotlight in. I didn't sit down, I just stepped up, half in the cab, and turned the truck on, headlights flaring to life. The dash cam recorded everything. I swung the wheel hard and hit the high beams directly toward the creek slope. The figure was gone. I swept the beams across the tree lean where the other one had ducked. Nothing. Then movement. One of them darting fast and low across the trail. I couldn't see their face. They didn't say a word, just moved like they knew the place. I didn't wait for a better look. I turned the wheel, rolled out in reverse, then down the dirt trail as fast as I could manage without bottoming out. My hands were tight on the wheel, the .38 still within reach, the spotlight between the seats. I kept looking in the rear view, expecting to see a light or a figure or a set of headlights. Nothing. When I got back to the gate, I stopped, locked it behind me like always, and kept going until I hit the highway. Then I pulled over and messaged my emergency contact, told them I was out early, safe, and heading home. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went over the dash cam footage. It showed me moving around the fire, the flash of the spotlight, a shadow near the slope. No faces, no clear shots, but I had the time and date. I filed a report with FWC, not expecting much. They were polite, but it wasn't enough to act on. That wasn't the first time I felt watched. It wasn't the first time I packed up fast and left before sunrise. But it was the first time I'd seen two people at once moving around my camp. I don't know what they wanted. Maybe just gear. Maybe worse. I still go out. I still work in the wild. I still camp alone. But I added another dash cam for the back window. I run a body cam sometimes too. I started using a second tripwire and I never, ever let my guard down. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't robbed. I made it out. That's all that matters. But I'll never forget how quiet it got, or how long they waited before they moved. I went camping alone a couple weeks ago at a provincial park I've visited a few times before. It's a place I've always felt comfortable in, even on my own. Usually, by the time I manage to book a site, the whole park is fully reserved. That always gave me a little peace of mind, just knowing there were other people around, even if I barely saw them. But this time, because of the wildfires earlier in the season and the constant downpour the week before, it was practically empty. I booked late and still got a spot, which never happens. I should have known then that this trip was going to be different. The campground loop is long and a bit isolated from the highway. While I drove in, I noticed right away how empty it was. The gatehouse was closed up with just a sign taped to the glass door saying the ranger would be doing occasional rounds, but wasn't stationed on site full time. That was already a bit of a red flag, but I kept going. After all, I've camped solo before and never had an issue. I told myself it was just the weather keeping people away. When I finally pulled into my site, number 37, I realized I was at the very end of the loop. The trees were thicker there, and the road narrowed as it curved around to the last few campsites. My spot was the farthest from the entrance and tucked into a densely wooded area. It was quiet. I mean, really quiet. No sounds of kids riding bikes or dogs barking from across the way. Just the wind in the trees and the occasional snap of a branch under something's foot. Probably a deer or squirrel, I told myself. There was only one other camper I saw on the drive-in, maybe 5 sites down from mine, site 32 or 33. A single guy with a small dome tent and an older SUV parked next to it. He was standing at his fire pit when I passed. I gave a little wave and a polite nod. He nodded back, kind of half smiled. He didn't look threatening or anything, just kind of kept to himself. I ended up seeing him a few more times over the next day or two, like when we'd cross paths walking the loop. We made a couple quick jokes about the rain, just enough small talk to break the ice, but I was careful not to get too familiar. I don't know if it's instinct or just a habit, but when I camp solo, I always sleep with my car keys right next to my sleeping bag. I can hit the panic button if I need to. I also keep bear spray within reach, and a whistle clipped to the inside of my tent flap. I've never had to use any of it. It's just part of my routine. That first night, I remember listening to the rain hit the top of the tent, loud at first, and then tapering off around midnight. I slept okay, but I kept waking up and checking my surroundings, shining my flashlight out the mesh, listening closely. Everything felt fine, just a little eerie because of how deserted the place was. The second day, the weather got worse. It poured all afternoon. I stayed mostly in the tent, reading, making tea on my little stove under the tarp. No one new came in that I noticed. The guy a few sites down didn't seem to leave much. His vehicle didn't move all day. Once I saw him walking in the trees near his site. He didn't wave that time. That night, I stayed up later than usual, mostly just waiting for the rain to ease up before I went to sleep. Around 11, I finally crawled into my sleeping bag. It was cold and damp in the tent, even with all my gear. I clicked off my headlamp and lay in the dark listening. The wind had picked up. The tarp over my cooking area flapped in the gusts. I heard a couple loud cracks from the woods, branches snapping. That's normal. Trees drop limbs all the time when it's windy. Still, I noticed my breathing was shallow. My fingers hovered over the keys for a second. Then I pushed them deeper into the pocket beside me and rolled over. Around maybe 2 or 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. No idea what had done it. I just remember sitting bolt upright in my sleeping bag. It was dead silent. No wind, no rain, not even the usual rustling of leaves. I held my breath. Then I heard something. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, not crunching leaves, but softly pressing into damp ground. Heavy like boots. They came from the direction of the trail, moving toward my sight. I stayed completely still. My heart started pounding. I reached slowly for my keys and gripped them tightly. My other hand found the bear spray. The footsteps stopped just before they would have reached the clearing where my tent was. I waited, straining to hear anything. Nothing for a while. Just a faint rustle of something brushing the side of the tent. Then a snap, like someone stepping on a twig right next to the fire pit. I hit the unlock button on my keys, and the headlights on my car blinked twice. Just a quick flash through the trees. I didn't see anyone, but I heard fast footsteps retreating back toward the road. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there in my sleeping bag, keys in one hand, bear spray in the other, staring at the flap of the tent, watching for any shadow, any movement. When the sky finally lightened, I unzipped the tent and looked around. The ground was too wet to see clear footprints, but near the fire pit, the layer of pine needles looked disturbed, like someone had definitely walked there. I packed up breakfast slowly, trying to act normal in case whoever it was still nearby and watching. A few hours later, I walked the loop to stretch my legs and passed by the other guy's site. He was sitting at his picnic table, looking down at something in his hands. He didn't look up. I noticed his boots were muddy. That day passed uneventfully, but my nerves were shot. I couldn't relax. I kept hearing noises and snapping twigs, even when there was nothing there. That night, I didn't light a fire. I didn't cook dinner. I stayed inside the tent, headphones in, listening to music just to drown out the quiet. Still, I barely slept. Every noise outside made me freeze. On the fourth day, 2 more groups arrived. One was a couple in their 50s with a trailer. The other was a family with 2 kids, both set up in the main loop, way closer to the entrance. That helped a little. I started to feel like maybe I wasn't completely alone anymore. The man 5 sides down packed up and left sometime late that afternoon. I heard his SUV start, watched it drive past through the trees. He didn't wave. I didn't either. That night, I slept a bit better. Still light, still alert, but better. The next morning, I went for a walk with my coffee. When I reached the spot where his site had been, I paused. I don't even know why. Maybe just curiosity. There was nothing left behind, but I noticed something strange. A worn path leading from the back of where his tent had been. It curved around behind the tree line, parallel to the road, toward my site. I followed it just a few feet, enough to see that it wasn't made by deer or animals. Someone had walked it repeatedly. The grass and leaves were pressed down into the mud. The path stopped about 50 feet from the edge of my clearing. Just stopped. I turned and walked away quickly. I didn't look back. That was my last night. I left early the next morning, before the sun was fully up. I didn't stop for breakfast, didn't even change out of my sleeping clothes. Just packed up, threw everything in the car, and got on the road. I never saw the guy do anything. I can't say for sure that it was him, but I know what I heard that night. I know what I saw. The path in the woods, the way he kept his distance, how he never really smiled after the first day. Maybe it was all just bad timing. Maybe he was harmless and just liked walking at night. But that doesn't explain the footsteps, the closeness, the way someone brushed my tent. I've camped alone plenty of times before and never felt like that. I still go camping, but not alone anymore, and never again at the end of the loop. I booked a basement Airbnb unit in a quiet neighborhood just outside a mid-sized city. It looked clean in the photos, gray stone walls, new flooring, recessed lighting, basic furnishings. The listing said it was a self-contained unit with its own entrance on the side of the house. It had good reviews, and I just needed a place to sleep for a few nights while I was in town for work. I arrived in the afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly single-family homes, some kids riding bikes, trees lining the street. The main house looked well kept. Light gray siding, white trim, 2 stories. The side entrance to the basement was tucked around the back, down a few steps. The keypad worked fine, and when I opened the door, it was cool and smelled faintly like fresh paint and detergent. Inside, it was as described. Small but cozy, a couch and a small TV, a queen-size bed, a kitchenette with a microwave and hot plate, and a full bathroom with a decent shower. Everything looked recently updated. Laminate floors, neutral paint colors, no clutter. There were a few signs on the walls with Wi-Fi info and emergency numbers. Just under the staircase was a white door with a standard brass knob and a deadbolt. It was locked. The host had mentioned it in the listing, locked utility closet under stairs, not accessible to guests. I didn't think twice about it. The first night was fine. I made some tea, watched something on my laptop, and went to bed around 11:30. It was quiet, no footsteps overhead, no traffic sounds. Around 3 a.m., I woke up suddenly. I wasn't sure why at first. No nightmares, no loud sound. I sat up and looked around. Then I heard it. One single knock. It came from the basement entrance door. Just one knock. Not a bang, not fast. A single, quick knock. Then nothing. I sat there listening. No footsteps, no voices, no repeat. After a while, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Or maybe some animal had bumped into the door outside. I went back to sleep. The second night, it happened again. I was asleep, then awake. Checked my phone. It was 3:02 a.m. I sat up, heart beating faster, and listened. A minute passed, then a knock. Just one. Sharp, soft, deliberate. No follow-up. I got up, walked to the door, and looked out the peephole. Nothing. I flipped on the porch light. Still nothing. I opened the door a crack, but the small yard outside was empty, dark, and still. No wind, no movement. That night, it took me longer to fall back asleep. I kept thinking about that sound. It wasn't the kind of knock someone makes if they need help. It was too soft for that, and it wasn't playful either. It was quick and oddly restrained, like someone testing something. Third night, I was already nervous when I got into bed. I left the lamp on. My phone was at 100%, flashlight app ready. I checked the porch camera through the Airbnb app. It was motion triggered, and the host said it was pointed at the side entrance. I didn't see anything new on the feed. I lay there for hours, unable to sleep, until at some point I drifted off. This time, I woke up before 3 a.m. Phone said 2:56. I sat up quietly, heart already racing. I turned off the lamp, let my eyes adjust to the dark, and stared toward the basement door. Nothing. 2:58. Still nothing. 2:59. The knob jiggled, just slightly, like someone tested it for half a second. Then the knock. Just one. Same as before. Light, quick. The same way you'd knock to see if someone might answer, but not loud enough to actually expect a reply. I didn't move. Didn't breathe for a few seconds. The door didn't open, and nothing else happened. Eventually, I got up and crept over to it. Looked through the peephole again. Nothing. I crouched and listened. No footsteps. No voices. No sound of retreating feet. It was just dead quiet. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining someone standing just outside the door, unmoving. I kept picturing someone watching from the dark yard or hiding beside the staircase. At 5 a.m., I gave up on sleep. I turned on every light, made tea I didn't drink, and sat on the edge of the couch until the sun came up. I didn't feel safe anymore. I kept going over it in my head. It didn't feel like a prank or a neighbor being annoying. It felt too calculated, too quiet. No one knocked like that by accident. Not every single night at exactly 3 a.m. But there was something else that started to bother me more. That door under the stairs. The fourth night, I kept the lamp on again. I sat on the couch instead of going to bed, watching the door with a knob. I didn't want to be caught off guard. I had my shoes on, my bag packed. I told myself if anything happened again, I'd leave. At 2:57, I stood and walked closer to the door. At 2:59, I held my phone with the flashlight on, but didn't turn it on yet. The knob jiggled, a little more this time. Then the knock. Soft, quick. I flipped on the flashlight and lunged forward, yanked open the door. Nothing. I stepped out, lights sweeping across the small yard. Nothing but grass, the back fence, and the empty side of the house. But before I closed the door, I thought I heard something behind me. A creak. From inside. I turned around, scanning the room. Then I saw it. The door under the stairs. The locked one. It wasn't open. But something had changed. The deadbolt was turned halfway. It wasn't locked anymore, just closed. I hadn't touched it. I hadn't even gone near it since I arrived. I stared at it for a long time. I walked over slowly, pressed my ear to it. Nothing. I touched the knob gently, didn't turn it. Then I stepped back, grabbed my bag, and left. I didn't even check out through the app. I walked straight up the stairs to the outside, locked the door behind me, and walked down the street until I found a gas station with lights on. I waited there until the sun was fully up. I messaged the host later and told them I had to leave early for personal reasons. They didn't ask questions. I didn't report it. I didn't want to argue about what I saw or heard. I just didn't want to think about it anymore. I don't know if someone was inside that storage room. I don't know if that door connected to the rest of the house, or if someone was using it to get into the unit at night. Maybe someone had a key. Maybe the host was lying. Maybe it was someone else entirely. But I know what I heard. I know that doorknob turned. I know that knock wasn't in my head. And I know I didn't touch that storage door. Whatever the reason, I wasn't going to wait around and find out what would have happened on the fifth night. A friend of mine, someone I trusted, offered to let me stay at their family's old hunting cabin for a few days. It was deep in the woods, about a 3-hour drive from the nearest town, and completely off-grid. I needed a break. My mind had been spinning for months, work stress, family things, just life piling on too heavy. When he handed me the keys and told me to use it as long as I wanted, I said yes without thinking twice. He gave me a few warnings. Nothing major. Said the place hadn't been used much in recent years, except for hunting season. He mentioned the raccoons specifically, said they sometimes got under the floorboards, scratched around a bit at night, maybe even nested in the crawl space. Annoying, but harmless, he said. I didn't think much of it. I've camped plenty. I figured I could handle a few loud animals. The drive up was long and winding, the road turning from pavement to gravel, and eventually just dirt with 2 tire ruts. Trees got denser the farther I drove. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun was low, casting gold light through the bare branches. The cabin itself was small, weathered but standing strong. It sat about 2 feet off the ground on short concrete blocks, the kind of place that looked like it had stood up to 100 winters and would handle 100 more. A narrow porch ran along the front. The door stuck when I pushed it open. Inside, it was basic. 1 room, wooden walls, a table with 2 mismatched chairs, a cot in the corner, an old wood stove, and a few shelves holding dusty canned food and rusted tools. There was a hand pump outside for water and a bucket toilet out behind the trees. No electricity, no cell signal. It felt perfect. That night, after making a simple dinner of canned chili over a small fire in the stove, I rolled out my sleeping bag on the cot and read by flashlight until I got too tired to keep my eyes open. I was out cold in minutes, but sometime deep into the night, something woke me. A sound, faint but steady. I lay still, listening. At first I thought it was just the wind. Then I thought it might be tree branches rubbing against the siding. But no, this sound was coming from directly beneath me. The cabin didn't have a basement. It was just crawl space under there, dirt, maybe 2 feet of headroom. And the sound wasn't scratching, like an animal. It was footsteps. They were slow and even. 1, 2. Pause. 1, 2. Like someone walking in circles. Pacing. I stayed still, my eyes wide open in the dark, flashlight in my hand, but turned off. The steps continued, soft but deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on packed dirt. After a minute, I couldn't take it anymore. I reached over and tapped the floor with my knuckles, lightly, just to see if the noise would stop. It did. For a moment, the silence was total. I held my breath. Then, from right beneath where I tapped, came 3 knocks. Solid, even, as if someone under there was answering me. I froze. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I kept the flashlight on, sitting up in my sleeping bag, listening to every creak and groan the cabin made. But after that last knock, there was nothing. No more pacing, no more noise at all. When the sky finally started to lighten, I got up and made coffee with the little propane burner I'd brought. I didn't even eat. I sat on the porch, holding the mug, trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was raccoons. Maybe the knocks were just something falling under the cabin. But I knew what footsteps sounded like, and I knew what I'd heard. By mid-morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see for myself. The crawl space had a small wooden panel on one side, just a couple feet wide. I grabbed my flashlight, got on my knees, and pulled the panel open. The smell that came out was musty and stale, like rotting leaves and old wood. I ducked down and crawled in. It was dark and tight under there. I had to keep my head low to avoid hitting the beams. The ground was mostly hard-packed dirt with some rocks and patches of moldy insulation. I swept the flashlight slowly, expecting to see animal droppings, maybe some nests or torn-up trash. But what I found stopped me cold. Near the center of the crawl space, directly under where the cot sat inside, was a pile of crumpled, flattened leaves that looked like someone had been lying on them. Next to it, a threadbare blanket, stained and torn. Scattered around were cigarette butts, at least a dozen of them. They weren't old, either. Some still had the filters intact, and I could see the faded red smudge of lipstick on one. There was a tin can, opened and licked clean. And then, a little further back in the shadows, something metal caught the light. It was a kitchen knife, rusted. The handle cracked and splintered, but the blade still intact. I stared at it for a long time. My hands started to shake, and I realized I was gripping the flashlight hard enough to make my knuckles go white. That was all I needed. I backed out as fast as I could, not caring about bumping my head on the beams or scraping my hands on the floorboards. I slammed the crawl space panel shut and ran inside, heart hammering. I threw everything back into my bag in under 5 minutes, my clothes, food, gear. I didn't stop to clean or pack properly. I didn't care. I just wanted out. I took one last look around to make sure I hadn't left anything, then locked the door out of habit and got in my car. Even as I pulled away, tires spitting dirt behind me, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I don't know what I expected to see. Someone crawling out from under the cabin? Someone watching me leave from the trees? I didn't see anything, but the feeling in my gut didn't ease up until I hit the main road and had phone service again. I never told my friend the full story. Just said I cut the trip short, told him the raccoons were louder than I expected. He laughed and said, yeah, they do that sometimes. I didn't correct him. I didn't send pictures. I didn't go back. I thought about calling the sheriff's office in that county, telling them what I found. But what would I say? That I heard footsteps and found some old trash under a cabin? It could have been a squatter. Could have been a hunter who used the space to hide out. But those knocks, that knife, I couldn't explain those. I haven't camped alone since. I still think about that first night sometimes, lying in the dark, listening to the footsteps. Someone was under there, walking in circles for who knows how long. And when I tapped the floor, they stopped, then knocked back. I didn't stay another night, and I never will. The Airbnb looked just like the photos. Clean, modern, a little minimalist. It was a second-floor apartment above a small grocery shop in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. I had booked it for 4 nights while I was in town for work and to get some time alone after a long stretch of stress. The host had messaged me before I arrived, saying the place was occasionally used but would be vacant during my entire stay. I didn't think much of that wording at the time. The first night went by without anything unusual. I unpacked a few things, walked down to the store below for some snacks, then came back, watched something on my laptop, and fell asleep on the couch. I was the only one in the building for what I could tell. The place had this stillness to it. Old radiator pipes, faint creaks here and there, but nothing out of the ordinary. The second day, I went for a long walk around the neighborhood after lunch. It was overcast, a little chilly. I had locked the door behind me, double-checked it out of habit before leaving. It was one of those newer doors with a twist knob lock and a separate deadbolt, and I used both. I didn't even carry much with me, just my wallet, phone, and a jacket. When I came back about 2 hours later, I noticed the door was slightly ajar. Not fully open, just barely unlatched. I froze on the landing for a second, staring at it. I knew I had locked it. I remember twisting both locks, pulling the door to make sure it caught. Inside, everything looked about the same at first. But just as I stepped in and pushed the door shut behind me, I saw them. A pair of muddy shoes sitting just inside the doorway. Brown, cheap canvas sneakers, one of them tilted like someone had kicked them off lazily. Not mine. Mine were still where I had left them in the corner near the couch. I stood there for a good minute, trying to think of any way they could belong to someone who had a reason to be there. Maybe the cleaner? Maybe the host had come by? But I hadn't gotten any messages, and nothing else looked disturbed, at least not obviously. The windows were closed. No lights were on. Nothing missing, as far as I could tell. Still, I walked through the apartment slowly, checked the bedroom, the bathroom, opened a small closet by the hallway. Nothing, but the air felt strange, like someone had just been there a little while ago. That humid, slightly sweaty kind of smell, like a room that had been occupied briefly and not aired out. I locked the door again, this time checking it twice. Sat on the couch, didn't turn on the TV, didn't do anything for a while. I just listened. My ears were tuned to every small sound. The hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of the building settling. But nothing else happened for the rest of the day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I left one lamp on in the corner. I didn't want the whole place lit up. I didn't want someone outside to know I was awake, but I couldn't handle being in total darkness either. Around 1 a.m., just as I was drifting off on the couch again, I heard the sound. The door lock jiggled. Not violently. Not like someone was forcing their way in. Just that quiet metallic click and turn, like someone thought they had a right to be there. Like someone used to walking in without knocking. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I watched the door handle shift down. It didn't open. The deadbolt was still on. But the handle lowered all the way and stayed there for a second, like the person on the other side was confused why it wasn't opening. Then it lifted back up. I sat up fast and yelled out, not even thinking. Not words, just noise, something loud enough to let whoever it was know I was there. I heard the creak of footsteps moving away down the stairs, fast but not panicked. I waited a full minute, heart hammering, then got up and double-checked the locks again. They were still in place. I stood by the peephole for what felt like forever, but I didn't see anyone else on the landing. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the chair by the door with the light off, listening. Nothing else happened, but I was wide awake until morning. Around 8 a.m., I messaged the host again. I kept it calm, just told them what happened. Asked if anyone else had access. I didn't expect them to admit anything, honestly. But about half an hour later, they replied. They said they were sorry, that the apartment used to be rented long-term to someone before they started using it as a short-term rental. The guy had moved out a few months back, but apparently still had a copy of the key. They said he had trouble letting go and had shown up a couple times, but they thought it had stopped. That was it. No apology. No offer to refund anything or come change the locks. Just he has trouble letting go. I didn't reply. I packed everything right then. Didn't even shower. Just threw my stuff in a suitcase, grabbed my jacket, and left. I didn't want to wait around to see if the guy came back. I kept checking over my shoulder the entire time I walked down the stairs and out to the street. I half expected to see someone watching from a window. I ended up booking a cheap hotel room across town for the remaining nights. Nothing fancy, but the kind of place where I could see the front desk from my door and where I knew no one else had keys but the staff. Looking back, there's a lot I could have done differently. Called the cops. Confronted the host more directly. Demanded a refund. But in the moment, all I wanted was to get out of there. The feeling of someone trying to come in like it was still their place, like I was the intruder, it stuck with me. That sense that someone else believed they still belonged there and didn't think they needed permission to walk in. It wasn't some dramatic ending. No fight. No shadowy figure in the hallway. Just a door that almost opened and a man who walked away when he realized someone else had locked it. But that was enough. It was real. Too real. I haven't used Airbnb since. It was the first night at the cabin. We'd arrived late afternoon, me and two friends, after a long drive through the mountains. The place was deep in the woods, farther out than I expected. No neighbors, no cell signal, no sound but wind through the trees and birds calling out once in a while. It felt peaceful at first. We unloaded our stuff, got the firewood inside, checked out the rooms. The cabin was old, but not run down. Wood creaked a little when we walked, but everything else was solid. No Wi-Fi, no TV. That was the whole point. Just a weekend away from people, phones, everything. After dinner, we sat around the fireplace for a while. Played cards, ate some chips, had a few drinks. Around 10, we killed the lights and got ready for bed. There were 2 bedrooms and a pull-out couch in the main room. I took the couch. I remember lying there under the thick wool blanket, staring at the ceiling beams and listening to the soft crackle of what was left in the fireplace. No moon that night. When we turned the lights off, it got really dark, like full black. You couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. I started drifting off, just beginning to slide into sleep when I heard 3 knocks. Loud and slow. They came from the back door. Not a window, not the wall. The back door. Just 3 knocks, then nothing. I froze. I didn't sit up right away. I just lay there staring into the dark, trying to be sure I'd really heard what I thought I heard. A second later, I heard one of my friends shifting in the next room, so I knew I wasn't the only one who'd heard it. No one moved. No one called out. We just waited. It was dead quiet outside. No footsteps. No rustling. Just a fire popping now and then. I sat up slowly and squinted at the back door. From where I was lying, I couldn't see it, but I kept listening. About a minute passed, maybe less. Then, 3 more knocks. This time, they came from the front door. Same pattern, same slow, heavy rhythm. I turned and looked toward the front window. There was no porch light, and it was too dark to see anything. I stood up and walked slowly over to the window, not turning any lights on, just moving quietly. I cupped my hand around my face and pressed them to the glass to block the reflection. I stared out into the woods. Nothing. No movement, no flashlights, no shapes. I held still and just listened. I couldn't hear breathing, couldn't hear footsteps. I stayed at the window for a while. My heart was beating heavy in my chest. Not panicked, just alert, focused. I looked toward the driveway, but there were no headlights, no tail lights, no silhouette of a car. If someone was out there, they hadn't driven, or they'd parked way out by the road and walked in. Still, no one moved. No more knocking came. We didn't speak. I didn't even see my friends, just heard one of them shut their bedroom door quietly a little later. I guess we all agreed silently not to answer, not to open the door. I stayed up for another hour, maybe 2, just lying there with my ears tuned to every sound. A raccoon moved through the leaves once. I heard a branch snap out by the trees, but nothing came close again. Eventually, I drifted off. In the morning, we got up early. None of us said anything at first. We just moved around the kitchen slowly, making coffee and toast, each of us avoiding eye contact. After a while, we stepped outside. That's when we saw the footprints. They were all over the dirt around the cabin. Not just a few. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. The ground was soft from a rain the day before, so the prints had sunk in deep. Most of them looked the same. Same size, same tread pattern. A flat rubber sole with a worn heel. They circled the cabin over and over, not just passing by. Whoever it was, they'd walked around the cabin again and again. They'd stepped up close to the windows. The shoe prints were right under the glass in the front, right under my window by the couch, right by the back door. Then they'd loop around the sides and come back, around and around. In one place, the footprints had overlapped so many times that the dirt was churned up. It looked like whoever was had stood there for a while, just standing. Not moving, not pacing, just standing still. There were no other prints. No dog tracks, no second person, no tire marks. Just that one pattern. One person, probably a man based on the shoe size, walking in circles around the cabin in the dark. We followed the prints out toward the tree line, but they disappeared a few yards in. The ground got rocky and dry. No tracks after that. Nothing to follow. We didn't say anything dramatic. No one freaked out. But the tension between us was thick. We packed most of our stuff before noon. We didn't even talk about staying the extra nights we'd planned. We left that afternoon. The drive down the mountain was quiet. I watched the trees for a while through the window, half expecting to see someone watching from behind them. I never did. We didn't report it. What would we say? No damage, no forced entry, no crime. Just knocking and footprints. That's all it was. But that was enough. Weeks later, I thought back on it and realized something. The knocks had come from both doors, back then front, less than a minute apart. To do that, someone would have had to move around the cabin in the pitch dark and silence, without a flashlight, without tripping or making a sound, and then stop right in front of the other door to knock again. Then vanish. Or maybe there were 2 of them, one at each door. That thought still sits in the back of my mind. We never went back. We don't talk about it anymore. But I still think about the man walking circles around the cabin, over and over, in the dark, watching us sleep. I booked the cabin because I needed to get away from everything. No phone, no work emails, no people. Just trees, a lake, and silence. It was late September, just cold enough that the bugs were gone, but the snow hadn't started yet. I found this small place through a rental site, a single-room cabin tucked about 50 yards off a narrow trail that circled a long, still lake in northern Wisconsin. No other cabins in sight, just woods pressing in on every side. The lake was glassy and still, and I could see leaves drifting down into it like little pieces of burned paper. I brought a cooler full of food, a hatchet, a good knife, and a few books. I didn't plan on talking to anyone for the entire week. The first day passed exactly how I hoped. I sat on the dock for hours with my feet in the water, cooked some ramen on the little propane stove, and read a few chapters of a book I'd started twice before but never finished. It was quiet, so quiet made my ears ring at times. I kept thinking I could hear someone talking far away, but it was always just the wind or maybe a loon out on the lake. At night, I made a fire in the stone pit behind the cabin and watched the stars until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. It was the kind of night I'd been craving. The second day, I noticed him. It was late morning, around 10. I had just come back from gathering some dry sticks to restock the woodpile when I saw him through the trees on the trail that ran maybe 20 feet from the front of the cabin. A man, middle-aged, scruffy beard, maybe early 50s. He had a dark backpack, looked worn and kind of slouched under the weight. He walked with a steady pace, not fast, but with a kind of rhythm to it. He didn't look at the cabin, didn't glance around. He just kept walking. His eyes were locked straight ahead. I figured he was just a hiker, someone doing a loop around the lake, maybe a few days into it. It made sense. The trail was public. But then, an hour later, I saw him again. Same man, same pace, same pack. Still didn't look up, still just walked past like the cabin didn't exist. The time I watched longer, thinking maybe I'd see where the trail bent and wrapped back, but he just disappeared between the trees, and I never saw him turn or come back the other direction. I told myself it could still make sense. Maybe there was a loop I couldn't see. Maybe he circled the lake more than once. But something about it stuck with me. The exactness of it. Same rhythm, same posture. Like watching a video repeat. At dusk, he came by again. I was inside cooking rice and beans, and just happened to glance out the window, and there he was. Still walking, still forward, same way. No flashlight, even though it was nearly dark. No change in pace, like he could see just fine. He passed, and I held my breath until he was gone from view again. This time I didn't try to make sense of it. I slept with the hatchet that night, just on the floor by the bed. I told myself I was being paranoid. Just some guy, probably a bit off, probably harmless. The woods attract those kinds of people. I've always known that, but still, I didn't sleep well. Every twig that snapped outside felt too close. I didn't light a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. The next day, I didn't go out at all. I stayed inside with the door locked and only went near the windows when I had to. I used the cooler water sparingly. Around the same time, just before 11, I heard steps on the trail. I didn't even look right away. I just listened, heart hammering in my chest. Then I cracked the side window curtain just an inch. And there he was. Again. Same man. I could swear he hadn't changed his clothes. Same dark jacket, same sagging pack. His face didn't move. His pace didn't change. I watched until the trees swallowed him up again. That was the fourth time. After that, I didn't even try to talk myself down anymore. Something was wrong. I didn't have any signal, so calling anyone wasn't an option. The trail was the only way back to my car, which was parked 3 miles away at the end of the access road. I wasn't about to take that trail, not while he was still out there. And if I tried to cut through the woods, I could get turned around. I wasn't stupid. I had no GPS, no map, and the trees all looked the same. That evening, I put a chair by the window and watched. I didn't cook anything that gave off a strong smell. I barely moved. I waited for the fifth pass. He didn't show up until nearly dark. This time I watched closer, and something felt more deliberate, like maybe he was walking slower, like maybe he was looking a little more to the side, toward the cabin. Not turning his head, but something in his posture was different. He didn't stop. He never did. But it felt like he wanted to, like he was thinking about it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back to the wall, hatchet in my lap, listening to every creak of the cabin. The wind came up strong around midnight and slammed a loose shutter against the wall, and I almost jumped out of my skin. Every time I blinked, I imagined footsteps outside. I kept picturing him standing just past the trees, just beyond the circle of dark, not moving. By the next morning, my last full day, I was jumpy and exhausted. I wanted to pack up and leave, but I couldn't bring myself to go out. The trail felt watched. Like the moment I stepped onto it, I'd see him walking toward me. So I waited. I kept the chair by the window. This time, I had the hatchet right on the table beside me. I planned to watch him pass one more time, just to make sure he was still just walking, still heading in the same direction. If he went by again, I figured I'd leave at dawn the next morning, as soon as the sky started to turn. But he never came. I watched the trail for hours. Noon passed. Then, mid-afternoon, the light started to thin, and still nothing. The trail was empty. The leaves kept falling, but no footsteps came. At first, I felt relief. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he had finally walked far enough. Maybe he wasn't looping at all. But that feeling didn't last long, because the more I stared at that empty stretch of trail, the more I wondered, why didn't he come by? Did he stop walking? Or did he step off the trail? Was he closer now? As night came, the feeling got worse. The silence didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt like holding my breath underwater. I couldn't see anything past the first line of trees in the dark. I didn't light a fire. I didn't even turn on a lantern. I just sat on the floor with my back against the bed and listened. At one point, I thought I saw something move in the trees. Just a shift of shape between the trunks. But I blinked and it was gone. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept my boots on. I kept the hatchet tight in my hand. I waited for the sound of footsteps on the porch, for a hand on the door. But it never came. When the sky finally started to turn gray the next morning, I didn't waste time. I grabbed my pack, didn't even eat breakfast, and stepped outside. The trail was dead quiet. I walked fast, every step feeling like it echoed too loud. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see him behind me, walking with that same pace. But the trail stayed empty. I made it to the car in less than an hour. My hands were shaking when I unlocked it. I didn't look back once. I didn't want to know if anyone had followed me. Even now, weeks later, I still think about him. That steady walk, that fixed stare, the way he passed by at the exact same pace, again and again. I looked at maps since. That trail doesn't loop. It just wraps halfway around the lake, then dead ends in thick forest. There's no way he could have come back that many times without me seeing him return. And I never did. I think that last night, he didn't stop walking. He just stepped off the trail,